Lena Vasek did not look like someone who was hiding. That was the whole point. She moved through the morning clinic with practiced ease, her white coat clean, her dark hair pulled back, her hands steady as she pressed a stethoscope to the chest of a golden retriever named Biscuit. The dog's owner, a retired school teacher named Carol, was talking about the weather. Lena smiled at the right moments, nodded when it was appropriate, and said exactly the kind of things a young, normal veterinary nurse was supposed to say. She was very good at being normal. She had been practicing for 10 years. The town of Harrow Creek sat nestled between two mountain ridges in the northern part of the state, close enough to the wilderness that elk sometimes wandered into back gardens, and the smell of pine never fully left the air. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors by name. Lena had chosen it carefully, not because she loved small towns, though she had come to appreciate the quiet. She had chosen it because small towns asked fewer questions. People here accepted a person at face value if that person smiled enough and showed up reliably. And Lena had smiled, and she had shown up, every single day for 8 years. Before Harrow Creek, there had been 3 other towns. Each one abandoned after a year or two, when she began to feel watched, or when someone asked too many questions, or when she simply could not stand being in one place long enough for the isolation to become a habit she could not break. She had learned, over time, that running too often was almost as dangerous as staying too long. Harrow Creek had become the exception. She had stayed because the job was steady, because the mountains made her feel safer than open ground, and because the clinic's owner, Dr. Philip Harmon, was 71 years old and asked nothing of her except that she be on time and gentle with the animals. She was always gentle with the animals. That part required no performance at all. When Carol and Biscuit left, Lena stood alone in the examination room and let herself breathe fully for the first time that morning. The smile faded. The careful posture softened slightly. She pressed her fingers to the cool metal of the examination table and stayed very still, listening. It was something she still did automatically, even after all the years of suppression. She listened, not with her ears alone, but with the deeper sense that had always been part of her, the one she had spent a decade trying to quiet. The sense that told her when something had shifted in the air, when the world was a half step out of rhythm, when something that did not belong had entered her territory. She had felt it this morning, a low, persistent hum at the edge of her awareness, like a sound heard through walls, impossible to locate precisely, but impossible to ignore. She had told herself it was nothing. She had told herself that many times over many years, and most of those times, she had been right. A hiker passing through, a delivery truck on the mountain road, nothing that concerned her. She went back to work. Lena had been 19 years old the night her world ended. She did not think of it in those terms anymore. She had trained herself out of that kind of language, because language had weight, and the wrong words, thought too often, had a way of dragging a person under. But that was what it had been. The end of the world she had known. The end of everything she had been. Her pack had been a small one. 31 members, occupying territory in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest. They were not a powerful pack, not in the political sense. They had no alpha of renown, no ancient bloodline, no alliances with the great dynasties that governed shifter society in the northern continent. They were simply a family, her family, people who had known her since she was born, who had watched her take her first shift at the age of 13, who had called her stubborn and clever and too curious for her own good. Her mother had braided her hair on Sunday mornings. Her father had taught her to track by scent in the forest at night. Her younger brother had followed her everywhere she went, 3 years behind her, always underfoot, always laughing. She did not let herself think about their names anymore. That was another rule she had made. The hunters had come in the early hours of a Tuesday morning in October. They had been organized, well-funded, and they had known exactly what they were dealing with. They had come prepared for shifters. The details of that night lived in Lena's body, in ways that her mind had mostly stopped trying to process. Sounds she could not unhear, a silence at the end that was worse than everything before it. She had survived because she had been in the forest alone, a habit of hers, slipping out before dawn to shift and run, something she did 3 or 4 mornings a week. She had been 2 miles from the settlement when it happened. She had felt the panic through the pack bond, a wave of terror and pain that hit her like cold water. And then, one by one, a terrible silence where each connection had been. She had known, before she ran back. She had known what she would find. She had run anyway. Because she had to. Because some part of her refused to accept what the silence was telling her, until she had seen it with her own eyes. When she arrived, there was nothing left to save. There was nothing left at all. She did not know, in those first hours, how she managed to think clearly. She had expected to be destroyed by grief. Instead, some cold and efficient part of her had taken over, something she had not known she possessed until the moment she needed it most. It had told her, with complete clarity, that the people who had done this would come back. They would want to confirm no one had survived. She had minutes, perhaps less. She had to go. She had to become invisible. She had to become someone they could not find. She had shifted back to her human form and walked away from the forest that night, wearing the clothes she had gone out in, carrying nothing but the keys to her car, which was parked half a mile down a side road. She had driven north without stopping. 3 states, 2 days. A gas station in Oregon where she bought a prepaid phone and a bottle of water and sat in the car park for 40 minutes, unable to remember why she had stopped. Then she had started making plans, because plans were something she could hold on to. The first plan had been the binding. She had heard of it, a technique passed down among lone shifters and scattered pack members who had found themselves without their people, without a territory, without the communal warmth that made the wolf part of a person feel anchored. Certain herbs, prepared in a specific way, combined with an act of focused will, it suppressed the wolf. Not permanently, not completely, but enough. Enough that her scent changed, muted down to something almost human. Enough that the instincts quieted to a manageable hum. Enough that she could walk through the human world and leave no trace for anyone looking. It had been the most painful thing she had ever done. Not in a physical sense. The herbs were bitter, and the preparation was careful and uncomfortable. But the real pain was not the body's pain. It was the pain of silencing something alive inside her. Her wolf had fought it. Lena had felt the animal part of her resist with everything it had, frantic and desperate, for 3 days straight. On the 4th day, the silence came, and Lena had understood, for the first time, what it truly meant to be completely alone. She had built a life out of that silence. Carefully, methodically, the way someone builds a wall, one careful stone at a time. She had created a new identity, with help from a contact she had found in her early days of running. A woman who asked no questions, and charged a significant fee, and delivered documents that would hold up to scrutiny. A new surname on paper, though she had kept her first name. She told herself it was practical. Fewer chances of not responding when someone called her. But there was another reason, one she did not examine too closely. Her mother had given her that name. It was the one thing she could keep without anyone knowing she was keeping it. She had enrolled in a veterinary nursing program under the new paperwork, working 2 jobs to pay for it, studying at a table in a rented room in a building where no one knew her. She had graduated. She had worked in 2 different clinics before Harrow Creek. She had kept her head down, and her past sealed tight behind a door she never opened. She was 29 now. She had a small house with a garden she mostly ignored, except for a row of lavender by the front step that had planted itself, and seemed determined to survive without her involvement. She had a cat named Harold who demanded nothing from her except a full food bowl and the occasional lap to sleep on. She had colleagues at the clinic who liked her in the uncomplicated way that people like someone reliable and undemanding. She had a doctor who trusted her judgment with his patients. She had a routine so well maintained that entire weeks passed without anything unexpected at all. She had almost convinced herself that this was enough. Not happy. She did not let herself aim for happy. Happiness was a thing that required roots, and roots required honesty, and honesty was something she could not afford. But enough. Livable. Safe in the way that a small locked room is safe. She had grown used to the shape of it. The clinic bell above the door rang at 11:15. Lena came out from the supply room to find a man she had never seen before standing at the front desk. He was tall, with dark hair cut short, and the kind of stillness in how he held himself that immediately registered in Lena's awareness, like a stone dropped into still water. He was looking at the framed photographs on the waiting room wall, animals that patients had sent in over the years, and he turned when she entered. She stopped. Not visibly. To anyone watching, she simply paused in the doorway, professionally attentive. But inside, something in her went completely quiet, in a way that had nothing to do with calm. The quiet of a person who has just heard a sound they cannot identify, and is listening with everything they have. He was a shifter. She knew it the way she knew the difference between her own heartbeat and someone else's. Not from his appearance. He looked like any well-built man in his early 30s, with steady gray eyes and a controlled, even expression, wearing a dark jacket and boots with genuine mud on them. But the knowing came from somewhere deeper than sight. The dormant instinct she had spent 10 years suppressing snapped awake with a speed that frightened her. It was like a light thrown on in a dark room. She kept her face exactly the same as it always was. Professional, mild, politely attentive. She had practiced this particular expression so many times over so many years that it was nearly automatic. "Good morning," she said. "Can I help you?" He looked at her for a moment before he answered. Just a moment, but it was the kind of moment that had weight to it, the kind that stretched slightly longer than it should. "I hope so," he said. His voice was even, unhurried. "I have a dog. She's been limping for a couple of days. Nothing urgent, I think, but I'd like her to be seen." "Of course," Lena said. "Dr. Harmon is with a patient just now, but he shouldn't be long. If you'd like to fill in the new patient form, I can get you registered while you wait." He took the clipboard she offered. Their fingers did not touch. Lena walked back to the supply room with her pulse behaving exactly as it should, and every single nerve in her body screaming at her to leave. Not this clinic, this town, this state. Her wolf, dormant and bound and silent for 10 years, was pressing against the inside of her chest like something trying to get out, and Lena had no idea why. She stood in the supply room and pressed both palms flat against the metal shelving, and breathed. In and out, steady, even. She ran through the usual check, the one she had developed over the years, for exactly these moments. Was she in danger? No. Was she identified? No. Was there any reason for alarm? No. Shifters pass through human towns all the time. This man had not looked at her with recognition. He had looked at her the way anyone might look at the person who handed them a clipboard. The moment of stillness had been nothing. Probably. She went back out when Dr. Harmon emerged and introduced himself. She stood slightly behind and to the side, and watched the man named Cale Drummond shake the doctor's hand, and follow him through to the examination room with a relaxed, easy confidence. And she noted, because she was trained to note things, that he moved through a space the way people did when they were accustomed to being in charge of it. His name, she read from the form when he was gone, was Cale Drummond. His listed address was the old Whitmore estate, 3 miles east of town on the mountain road. He had been in residence for less than a week. His dog was a Belgian shepherd named Gray, 4 years old. No previous veterinary records on file. Lena filed the form and went back to work. She spent the rest of the morning doing her job with the same quiet precision she always brought to it. She organized the supply cabinet. She updated patient files. She made 2 follow-up calls. She drank her coffee standing at the small window in the break room, looking out at the car park, watching nothing in particular. She did not think about gray eyes and the way her wolf had pressed against its binding like a tide against a wall. She absolutely did not think about that. At 5:30, she locked up the clinic, walked to her car, and sat behind the wheel for 4 full minutes before she trusted herself to drive. The hum she had felt that morning was not nothing. She had known that since 11:15. She had known it with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had spent a decade sharpening her instincts, precisely so that she would never be surprised, never be caught, never be left again in the position of running from something she had not seen coming. Something had come to Harrow Creek. The question was what she was going to do about it. The answer, as it had always been, was simple on the surface and agonizing underneath. She was going to do nothing. She was going to go home, feed Harold, eat something sensible, and sleep. And tomorrow morning, she was going to come back to the clinic and be exactly who she had always been in this town. A normal woman, a veterinary nurse, someone with no history worth asking about. Lena Vasic. Not her real name, not her real life, but the only one she had left, and she intended to keep it. She started the car and drove home through the pine-scented dark, and she did not look in her rearview mirror once, because she had learned a long time ago that looking back only ever made the road ahead harder to see. The mountains rose on either side of the road like silent witnesses, enormous and indifferent, and the sky above them was already filling with the first cold stars of the evening. She turned the heater on. She thought about what she would make for dinner. She reminded herself that the filing for Thursday needed to be finished by Wednesday morning. Small, ordinary, human thoughts. The kind she had trained herself to keep at the front of her mind at all times. A row of small, ordinary thoughts, like a fence between herself and everything she could not afford to feel. She pulled into her driveway. Harold was watching from the front window, a gray shape in the glass, waiting. She looked at him for a moment before she opened the car door. 10 years. She had built 10 years here, and in 3 other towns before this one, and not once had she come this close to unraveling in a single morning. She got out of the car, locked it behind her, and walked up the path to her front door. The lavender brushed her hand as she passed it. She unlocked the door. Harold wrapped himself immediately around her ankles and complained at length about the lateness of his dinner. She fed him first, before she even took off her coat. Then she sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of her small, ordinary house, and she allowed herself, for exactly 2 minutes, to be afraid. Then she put the fear away, folded it neatly, placed it somewhere it would not interfere. She had done this so many times that it had become almost mechanical. She made dinner. She washed the dishes. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time before sleep came, listening to the wind come down from the mountains, and somewhere very deep inside her, past all the barriers and the bindings and the years of careful silence, her wolf listened too. The Whitmore estate had been empty for 11 years before someone moved in. Lena knew this because Harrow Creek was the kind of town where everyone knew the history of every property, and the Whitmore estate was particularly well known for being large, and old, and very deliberately closed off from the rest of the town by a combination of iron gates, overgrown hedges, and the natural barrier of the mountain slope behind it. Old Nathan Whitmore had died without heirs, and the property had passed through a series of holding companies whose names meant nothing to anyone in town, and for over a decade, the big house at the end of the mountain road had simply sat there, visible from certain angles on the high street, and spoken about occasionally, with the vague interest that people directed at things that were there, but not quite accessible. Someone had rented it. That was what people were saying. Carol, the retired schoolteacher, told Lena this on Wednesday morning, while her cat, a dignified tabby named Professor, submitted reluctantly to his annual checkup. A private group, she had heard. Something to do with wildlife conservation. They had apparently already sent someone to the hardware store for supplies, and paid in cash, which Carol reported with the tone of someone filing this detail away, as interesting but not alarming. Lena asked 1 or 2 politely curious questions, the kind a normal person would ask, and then moved the conversation along. She did not mention that she already knew, at least in part, who had moved into the Whitmore estate. She did not mention the man who had brought his limping Belgian shepherd in on Monday morning. She did not mention that when he had walked back through the waiting room after the appointment, he had glanced in her direction just once, and she had been looking at her computer screen with absolute professional focus. She also did not mention that she had driven past the estate road on the way into work that morning and had not stopped, had not slowed down, and had kept her eyes on the road in front of her. Everything normal, everything fine. She checked the rest of her morning patients in and went about her work. By Thursday, the talk had grown. The hardware store owner said a group of about 8 had been in for fencing materials. The woman who ran the diner said 3 of them had come in for lunch on Tuesday. Quiet, polite, good tippers, and no trouble at all. But 2 of them had sat facing the door the entire time, which she found slightly odd. The postmaster said he had accepted a significant number of packages addressed to a company called Ashevale Wildlife Research, and that the return addresses were from different states. Lena filed every piece of information away, and told herself she was doing this because information was safety, not because she was interested in the people who had moved into the estate. She was very good at telling herself the things she needed to believe. On Friday evening, she drove home a different way. She told herself it was because the main road had roadworks starting on Monday, and she wanted to know if the alternative route was viable. It took her on a road that ran parallel to the mountain slope, and from a certain bend, the upper story of the Whitmore estate was briefly visible above the tree line. There were lights in the windows. Warm, yellow light, the kind that meant people inside, doing ordinary things. She did not slow down. On Saturday, she hiked. This was normal. She hiked most Saturdays when the weather allowed, taking the trail that wound up the southern slope of the eastern ridge. It was one of the few things she allowed herself that felt genuinely natural: the elevation, the silence, the pine smell, the way her body found its rhythm on uneven ground without effort. She never shifted on these hikes. Not anymore. But the hikes were as close as she got to the forest self she had once been, and she was not willing to give them up. She made it to the ridge lookout by mid-morning, and sat on the flat rock she always used, a smooth granite slab with a crack through the middle, looking out over the town and the valley below it. From here, she could see the Whitmore estate clearly. The grounds were larger than she had realized from road level. The main house was a gray stone building, older than most things in the area, with a broad front and a newer extension to one side. The gates were closed. 2 vehicles were parked in the gravel drive. There was no one visible, but a light was on in the extension. She looked at it for about 20 seconds, and then looked at the valley instead. She ate her lunch. She started back down the trail. She was 20 minutes from the trailhead when she heard it. A sound. Low, urgent. An animal in pain, somewhere in the trees to her right, far enough from the path that she could not see it, but close enough that the sound reached her clearly. Lena stopped. This was one of the things she could not suppress. The hearing was tied to the wolf, but it was woven deep enough into her body that even 10 years of binding had not fully muted it. She could not filter it out the way she filtered out most of the wolf sense. She heard things, not always, and not with the clarity she once had, but in moments of stillness, sounds reached her that would have been inaudible to a fully human person standing in the same spot. The animal in the trees was large. The quality of the sound told her that, not a cat or a fox, something bigger. She hesitated. She should keep walking. She had a strict rule about keeping her distance from situations that might lead to complications. She had learned, in the early years, that even a small deviation from the ordinary could attract the wrong kind of attention. A veterinary nurse who could find an injured animal in thick woodland without a path was a veterinary nurse with questions to answer. The sound came again, lower this time. She left the path. She found it 40 meters into the trees, where the ground dipped into a shallow hollow. A Belgian shepherd, gray-coated, lying on its side between the roots of 2 old pines, one foreleg extended at an angle that was clearly painful. The dog lifted its head when Lena appeared, and made a sound that was partly a warning and partly something that sounded, heartbreakingly, like relief. Gray. She recognized the coloring from the intake notes. Cale Drummond's dog. Lena crouched and stayed still, letting the animal look at her, assess her. The dog's breathing was elevated but not panicked. The foreleg was the issue, probably a strain or a mild fracture from the look of the angle, but she could not tell without examination. There was no visible bleeding. The dog had been moving, she thought, until recently. There were marks in the soft earth. "All right?" she said quietly, to the dog and to herself. "All right?" She pulled out her phone and found no signal. Not surprising. She was in a hollow with ridges on 3 sides and the mountain behind her. She looked at the dog. The dog looked back at her. She made her decision in about 4 seconds flat, which was in itself longer than the situation probably required. She did not have a lead. She used the cord from her jacket hood, a practical if imperfect solution, and with considerably more patience than she had time for, she got the dog calm enough to allow careful handling. She was good with animals in pain. She had always been good with animals in pain. The dog seemed to understand that she was trying to help, or perhaps just that she was not a threat, and allowed her to splint the leg roughly with 2 straight sticks and a strip from the base of her hiking shirt, and then, slowly, to guide it up and out of the hollow. Back on the trail, her phone found a weak bar of signal. She called the clinic first, out of habit. Dr. Harmon did not answer. Saturday afternoon, she knew he would be at his daughter's house. She called the clinic line and left a brief message. Then she looked at the tag on the dog's collar. A number. No name on the tag except the dog's. She dialed. It rang twice. "Yes," said Cale Drummond's voice. Not hello. Not a greeting. Just yes, in that same even, unhurried tone she had heard across the examination room, as if he had been expecting a call and this was simply it arriving. "This is Lena Vasek from Harrow Creek Veterinary," she said. "I've found your dog on the East Ridge Trail. She's got an injury to her right foreleg. Not an emergency, but she needs proper examination. I can get her down to the clinic if you want to meet me there." A pause. Brief. "How did you know it was Gray?" "I recognized her from her intake notes," Lena said. Which was true, if incomplete. Another pause. Fractionally longer. "I'll be at the clinic in 20 minutes. He arrived in 18. Lena was already there, having carried the dog the last half-mile, because the animal had begun to flag. She had let herself into the clinic with her key and settled Gray on the examination table, and was cleaning the area around the splint when she heard his vehicle on the gravel outside. He came through the door and went directly to the dog, not to Lena first, to Gray. He put his hand on the dog's head and said something low, and the animal's tail moved once. Then he straightened and looked at Lena across the table. "She got out this morning," he said. "We've been looking for 3 hours. She was in the hollow on the east side of the upper trail," Lena said. "It's not marked on the public maps. Easy to miss the dip." She had her professional face on, steady and focused on the dog. "I think she's strained the flexor tendon, possibly a small fracture at the base. Dr. Harmon should look at it Monday, but for now she needs rest, no weight on that leg, and something for the inflammation." "You carried her down," he said. It was not quite a question. She couldn't manage the terrain on her own. He looked at her for a moment. That same weighted moment she had noticed in the waiting room on Monday, the kind that lasted just slightly too long to be ordinary. His gray eyes were steady and gave nothing away, and Lena held his gaze with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that looking away first was always more suspicious than holding the look. "Thank you," he said. "It's my job," she said. "You're not on duty." She had no answer for that would not sound like she was trying too hard. So she handed him the anti-inflammatory she had measured out, and explained the dosage, and told him to keep the dog off the leg, and watched him gather Gray carefully into his arms. At the door he stopped. "The hollow you mentioned," he said. "You said it's not on the maps." "It's not. You knew exactly where she was." Lena met his eyes. "I've been hiking that trail for 8 years," she said. "I know every part of it." He nodded once, slowly, as if he were filing that answer away, rather than accepting it. Then he carried his dog out to his vehicle and drove back up the mountain road, and Lena stood in the empty clinic and listened to the sound of his engine fade into the pine-scented Saturday afternoon. She locked up. She walked to her car. She drove home. She did not let herself think about the way he had looked at her. She also did not let herself think about the fact that she had felt, for just a moment, while she was carrying that dog down the mountain, something she had not felt in a very long time. Not comfortable. Not the ordinary numbness that had become so familiar it felt like peace. Something else. Something warmer than that, and considerably more dangerous. She fed Harold his dinner and stood at the kitchen window, while the last of the daylight left the sky, and she thought about nothing, and she thought about everything, and she told herself, for the 100th or the 1,000th time, the one thing she had built her entire surviving life on. This was not a story in which she got to have things. This was a story in which she stayed safe, and stayed hidden, and stayed alive. That was all. That had to be enough. Outside, the mountains were dark, and the estate road was out of sight from her window, and Harold wound around her ankles, until she came away from the glass and sat down on the kitchen floor with him, the way she sometimes did when the house felt too quiet, and let him walk across her lap and settle himself, with the enormous self-satisfaction of a creature who had never once in his life needed to pretend to be something he was not. She scratched behind his ears. She did not sleep well that night, but she had not slept well in 10 years. This was not new. This was just the same old darkness wearing a different face. She told herself that too. She told herself quite a lot of things. She was beginning to suspect that some of them were running out of places to stick. She was at the clinic when it opened on Sunday. Not because it was her shift. The clinic was closed on Sundays. She was there because she had a key, and a restless mind that did not respond well to a day with no structure, and because cataloging the supply inventory was something that needed to be done before the order deadline on Tuesday, and because doing something useful with her hands was the closest thing she had to therapy. She worked for 2 hours in the quiet of the supply room, counting and noting and reorganizing with the focused efficiency that had become her main coping mechanism for most of the complicated things in life. The clinic smelled like antiseptic, and the particular brand of animal-specific cleaning products that she had stopped noticing years ago, but that she associated now with safety, with routine, with the shape of the life she had built. At around 10 in the morning, she heard a car on the gravel outside. She went still. She was not doing anything wrong. She had every right to be here. She had a key and an inventory to complete, and there was absolutely no reason to feel the particular tightening in her chest that she felt when she heard the car door open and recognized, without looking, who it was. She recognized him the way prey recognizes danger. Not the thought first, but the body, the instinct, the thing underneath all the years of binding, that was older and more honest than anything she had trained herself to feel. She walked to the front of the clinic and unlocked the door before he knocked. He was standing on the step with a brown paper bag in his hand, not gray. He had left the dog somewhere safe, she hoped. "I thought the clinic was closed today," he said. "Inventory," she said. He held out the bag. "Coffee and something from the diner. For carrying my dog down a mountain." She looked at him. She looked at the bag. She looked at him again. "You didn't need to do that." "I know," he said. "Do you want it anyway?" She did. That was the problem. She wanted the coffee, and she wanted the ordinary human interaction of a person saying thank you, and she wanted to be someone who could have those things, without calculating the risk of every moment. But wanting was not the same as safe. She took the bag. "Thank you," she said. She did not invite him in. He did not try to come in. He stood on the step, and she stood in the doorway, and they occupied the exact professional distance of two people who had no reason to be anything other than casual acquaintances, and it felt like standing at the edge of something, with a very long drop on the other side. "How is she this morning?" Lena asked. "The dog. Neutral ground." "Better. She slept through the night, and she's keeping weight off it, the way you said." He paused. "She doesn't usually like strangers." "Animals in pain sometimes make exceptions," Lena said. "They know when someone is trying to help." He looked at her steadily. "People don't always." She had nothing to say to that. Or rather, she had quite a lot to say to that. None of which she was going to say on a Sunday morning, standing in the doorway of a closed clinic, with a man she did not know and could not afford to know. "I should get back to the inventory," she said. "Of course." He stepped back. "Monday for the appointment?" "Monday at 9, if that suits." "It suits," he said. He walked back to his vehicle. He did not look back. Lena stood in the doorway and watched him go, with the coffee cup warming her hands and the morning air, cold on her face, and she counted the seconds until he was out of sight, and then she went inside and closed the door and stood with her back against it. The coffee was very good. She drank it at the supply room counter while she finished the inventory, and she was thorough and accurate, and she did not make a single error in the count. But her hands were not completely steady. And the wolf at the bottom of her, bound and silent and supposed to be absent, was pressing softly, insistently, against everything she had used to contain it. Not violently, not frantically, the way it had the first time she had seen him. Just steadily, like water finding the hairline crack in a wall and working at it, patient and persistent, in the way that water has always known how to be. Lena finished the inventory. She locked the clinic. She drove home. She did not go back the way that passed the estate road, and she did not think about gray eyes or the sound of a voice that said things that had more than one meaning, and she did not think about what it felt like to be looked at as if someone was paying genuine, careful attention to what they saw. She thought about the inventory instead. She was very disciplined. She had been very disciplined for 10 years. But discipline, she was beginning to remember, was not the same thing as invulnerable, and walls, however carefully built, were still just walls, and water was patient in a way that walls could never quite match. She drove home. She made lunch. She read a book. She had a bath. And at no point did she let herself name the things she had felt on the mountain slope, carrying a dog that belonged to someone who looked at her like a question he already knew the answer to. She did not name it. She did not need to. She already knew what it was. That was exactly what frightened her. Monday began like any other Monday, and stopped being like any other Monday at approximately 9:15 in the morning. Cale Drummond arrived with Gray at 9 on the dot, which told Lena something about him that she filed away without examining too closely. He set the dog on the examination table and stepped back, and Dr. Harmon came in at 9:02, and the appointment proceeded in the entirely normal way that veterinary appointments proceed. Except that Cale stood on the far side of the table from Lena the whole time, and she was aware of exactly where he was standing, in a way that had nothing to do with her professional responsibilities. The verdict was a strained tendon, no fracture, Rest and anti-inflammatories. Return in a week. The whole thing took 11 minutes. Gray behaved with the same stoic dignity that Lena had noticed on the mountain, submitting to examination with the patience of an animal who had learned that cooperating with veterinary appointments was simply one of life's requirements. When Dr. Harmon left, Lena handed over the printed aftercare sheet and answered the 2 follow-up questions without looking directly at Cale more than was necessary. She was precise and thorough and completely professional. "There's someone asking about you in town," he said, just as she finished. Lena's hands did not move. She kept her eyes on the counter where she was straightening the stack of aftercare sheets, and felt the specific quality of stillness that was not calm at all, but was the absence of visible reaction. "Asking about me," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "A man," he said. "He was in the diner yesterday evening. He was asking the owner if a woman named Lena had been working in the town a long time. Dark hair, works with animals. He was being casual about it, friendly." She looked at him now. She could not avoid it without making the avoidance obvious. "What did the owner say?" she asked. "That she'd have to check. She mentioned it to one of my people who was in having dinner." He paused. "I thought you should know." Lena took in a breath so carefully measured it required her full concentration. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate that." She could see him watching her. He was watching the way she was holding herself together, she thought, with the particular focus of someone trained to notice exactly that kind of thing. She made herself relax her shoulders slightly, made herself look mildly concerned rather than the thing she actually was, which was calculating 17 different things simultaneously, at a speed she had not needed in a very long time. "Do you know who it might be?" he asked. "Probably someone I went to school with," she said, lightly. "I'm not particularly easy to find on the internet. People get curious." She smiled. It was a good smile. She had practiced it thousands of times. "I appreciate the heads up." He picked up the aftercare sheet, folded it once, and put it in his jacket pocket. He had long, steady hands, she noticed, not for the first time. She had been noticing quite a few things she was not supposed to be noticing. "If it becomes a problem," he said, "let me know." She had no idea what to do with that sentence. It assumed a connection that did not officially exist. It assumed that she might tell him something, or that he might do something about it, or that there was any version of this situation in which she would allow herself to lean on anyone else's resources. "I'm sure it won't," she said. He nodded once, gathered Gray carefully from the table, and left. Lena waited until she heard his vehicle pull out of the car park. Then she went to the back office, closed the door, and took out her phone. She had 2 numbers she could call if she ever needed to run. A contact in the northwest and a contact further east, both of them people from the old world she had retained from before her life had split in 2. She had not called either of them in 6 years. She did not call them now. She sat with the phone in her hands and thought with the cold, rapid clarity that danger always brought out in her. A man, asking casually, friendly. Hunters worked like that. They did not announce themselves. They came in the side door, all warmth and curiosity, asking gentle questions, and by the time anyone realized what they were asking, the picture was already assembled. She thought about the Whitmore estate. She thought about Cale Drummond's inner circle and their wildlife conservation cover story, and the way they sat in the diner facing the door. She thought about the fact that they had been in this area for less than a week, and already there was someone asking questions in town. Coincidence was something Lena had stopped believing in at the age of 19. She went home at lunchtime, which she never did. She told Dr. Harmon she had a headache. She checked her house systematically, the way she had been taught in the years when checking was a daily necessity. She looked at the contents of her go bag, the one she kept under the bed in the back room, the bag with the second set of documents and the cash, and the prepaid phone, and the things she would need if she had to leave fast. Everything was there. She stood in her bedroom and looked at the bag and understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that she was considering running again. 8 years. She had been here for 8 years. She had a job she was good at. She had a doctor who trusted her. She had Harold, who was sitting in the doorway of the bedroom looking at her, with the profound concern of a cat whose routines were being disrupted. She had nothing, and she had everything, and she had built this nothing everything very carefully, and she was not ready to leave it. Not yet. Maybe not at all. She put the bag back under the bed. She did something she had not done in 6 years. She drove to the far end of the valley, to a stretch of forest reserve that was well off the tourist trails, parked the car off the road, and walked into the trees until she was certain she was alone, and the wind was from the right direction. Then she sat on a fallen log in the silence of the afternoon forest, and she reached inward, past the binding, past all the careful years of suppression, and she tried to listen. It was like trying to hear music through a very thick wall, muffled, distorted. But there, beneath everything, beneath the years of quiet and the herbal compounds she still refreshed twice a year, and the sheer force of will that had held the wolf down for a decade, there was still something alive. She had not known, until this moment, how frightened she had been that there might not be. She sat there for a long time. The forest was quiet around her. A hawk crossed the sky somewhere above the canopy. The afternoon light came through the trees in long, clean slants. She thought about a man asking questions in a diner. She thought about the people at the Whitmore estate. She thought about the hunters who had come to the forest in October, 10 years ago, who had been organized and prepared, and had known exactly what they were targeting. She thought about what it meant that someone was now asking about a dark-haired woman who worked with animals in a small mountain town. She thought about Cale Drummond saying, "Let me know if it becomes a problem," in that voice that assumed, without apparent effort, that his word could be translated into a solution. She did not know if she trusted him. She did not know enough about him to trust him. But she noticed, and this was worth noting, that something in her did not distrust him. The wolf sense, muffled and bound and years away from what it had once been, had not reacted to him the way it reacted to threat. It had reacted to him the way it reacted to something familiar, something it recognized from a long time ago. She did not know what to do with that. She walked back to the car. She drove home. She made dinner with mechanical precision, and ate without tasting it, and sat with Harold on her lap for an hour, while the evening settled around the house. Her phone rang at 7:45. Blocked number. She almost let it go, but blocked numbers were something she answered, always. The rule had saved her twice. "Yes," she said. "My name is Soren Aldrich." The voice was male, controlled, professional. "I work with Cale Drummond. I need about 4 minutes of your time." Lena said nothing. "The man asking about you in the diner," Soren continued, "is named Victor Carnes. We know who he is. You may also know who he is, depending on your history. I would like to share some information with you. This call is not a threat. It is not an attempt to identify you or place pressure on you. It is 4 minutes of information that I believe you will want to have." Lena stood very still in her kitchen, with the phone pressed to her ear. "4 minutes," she said. "Victor Carnes has been active in this region for approximately 8 months. He is part of a network that your employer would call a wildlife poaching operation, because that is the cover they use. They are not poachers." He paused. "We believe you are aware of what they actually are." She closed her eyes briefly. "Continue," she said. "They have been tracking the Ashevale group for 14 months. They came to Harrow Creek because we came to Harrow Creek. They arrived approximately 4 days after we did, which means they have better surveillance on our movements than we had estimated. The question of why a man in that network is specifically asking about a local veterinary nurse with your description is one we are trying to answer," she said. "And we would like your cooperation in answering it," he said. "That is the 4 minutes. Any questions beyond that we would prefer to discuss in person." "In person," she said. "At your convenience. Your choosing of time and location. No obligation." A pause. "We are aware that you have no reason to trust us. We are also aware that you have every reason to be careful. We are not asking you to be anything other than careful. We are asking you to consider that you may not, at this particular moment, be best served by being alone." The call ended. Lena lowered the phone from her ear. She stood in her kitchen for a very long time. Outside, the mountains were dark and enormous, and completely indifferent to the situation unfolding at their base. Harold jumped onto the counter and knocked her car keys onto the floor, and then pretended he had not done this. Victor Carnes. She did not know that name, but she knew the type it represented. She had known them for 10 years. She had been running from them for 10 years. She had told herself, in the way that people tell themselves things they need to be true, that they had given up, that they had moved on to other targets, that she had been hidden long enough to be forgotten. She had known, underneath that she might be wrong. She picked up Harold's keys and set them on the counter. She thought about Soren Aldrich's voice. Professional. Even. We are not asking you to be anything other than careful. She thought about Cale Drummond, on Monday morning, folding a piece of paper and putting it in his pocket and saying, "Let me know if it becomes a problem." She thought about 10 years of doing everything alone, of trusting no one, of building walls and refreshing bindings and abandoning towns and calling it safety, when sometimes it was just another word for the same loneliness in a different postcode. She reached for her phone. She did not call the number back, not yet. She was not ready for that yet. But she did not delete it either. She went to bed at 10. She lay in the dark. Above her, through the ceiling, through the roof, the sky was wide and cold, and full of stars that had been there long before any of this, and would be there long after. And somewhere in the forest at the edge of town, something that might have been an owl called out once into the dark, and then went quiet. Lena Vasek lay still, and breathed and thought, and made no decisions, and made all the decisions, and did not sleep until almost 3 in the morning. The walls were cracking. She could feel it. And the thing pressing against the inside of them, patient and persistent, was not just fear anymore. It was something she had buried so long ago she had almost forgotten its name. Almost. But not quite. By Tuesday morning, Lena had arrived at a decision. Not to trust them. That would be premature and reckless, in a way she could not afford. But to gather more information, which was not the same thing as trust, and which was, at this point, a practical necessity. She knew what to look for. She knew how to research, without leaving a clear trail. She knew the kinds of records that were publicly available, and the kinds of patterns that showed up in them, when a group like Ashevale Wildlife Research was what it claimed to be, and when it was something else. She spent her lunch break in the clinic office with the door closed, working through everything she could find. Ashevale Wildlife Research had a clean digital record, a registered nonprofit in 3 states, tax filings current and correct, a modest website with project descriptions that were written with the specific, boring accuracy of something that was real, wolf population monitoring, habitat corridor mapping, livestock coexistence programs, nothing that screamed cover story, which was either because it was genuine or because it was an excellent cover story, and those two things were sometimes identical. She found a photograph of Cale Drummond in a local news article from 3 years ago in another state. He was standing at a press conference alongside a wildlife biologist, talking about a reintroduction program. He looked exactly as he did in person, contained, focused, the kind of person who said one thing and meant it, rather than the kind who said one thing and meant several others simultaneously. The article did not tell her what she actually needed to know. It told her what he wanted the world to know. She closed the laptop. She thought about Victor Carnes. If the hunters had followed Ashevale to this town, it meant they had been tracking Ashevale for a while. And if they had been tracking Ashevale and had then found her here, in the same town, then either this was a coincidence of extraordinary improbability, or it was not a coincidence at all, and she already knew what she thought about coincidences, which meant that Harrow Creek was not safe anymore. Which meant she had a choice to make. Run, and run fast, before Carnes had a clear enough picture to report back to whoever sent him. Leave the clinic, the house, Harold, the lavender, the hiking trail and the granite rock on the ridge, the 8 years of careful ordinary life, and start again somewhere else. She had done it before. She could do it again. Or stay. Stand still for the first time in 10 years, and face whatever was coming, instead of getting ahead of it. Consider, carefully and without the panic that wanted to make her decisions for her, whether the group that had come to this town was something other than a threat. She thought about what Soren had said, "You may not, at this particular moment, be best served by being alone." She thought about how much she had hated the truth of it. She thought about 31 people in a forest in October. She picked up her phone and texted the blocked number a single line. Wednesday, 6 p.m. The car park at Harrow Trailhead. Come alone. The reply arrived in under a minute. Understood. One word. No pushback, no negotiation, no attempt to rearrange on his terms. Lena put her phone away and went back to work. She had 2 days to prepare. 2 days to decide exactly how much she was willing to say, and exactly how much she needed to hear. 2 days to remind herself of every rule she had ever made, and every reason those rules existed, and every grave consequence of forgetting them. 2 days to also, in the quiet moments she could not completely control, feel the particular strange warmth of knowing that someone had thought it worth their time to warn her. She was careful. She was always careful. But careful and alone, she was beginning to understand, were not the same thing as safe. They had never been the same thing. She had just needed 10 years to admit it. She arrived at the Trailhead car park at 5:50 and sat in her car for 10 minutes watching the access road. No vehicle followed her in. No one was waiting in the shadows near the tree line. The car park was empty, except for a single pickup truck she did not recognize, and it was empty of occupants. She scanned it, noted the license plate, noted the angle of the mirrors and the fact that the engine had been off long enough that there was no heat shimmer above the hood. At 6 on the dot, a second vehicle came down the access road and parked 2 spaces from hers. Cale Drummond got out alone. He stood beside his truck and waited. Lena got out of her car. The evening was cool and still, the light going amber through the pines, the mountains casting their long shadows over the valley below. She walked to a point roughly equidistant between their vehicles and stopped. He came to meet her, not hurried, not performing any particular version of himself for her benefit, just present. "You came alone," she said. "You asked me to. And you had no issue with that." He looked at her steadily. No. She studied him for a moment. She was good at reading people. She had become very good at it out of necessity, the way that all seriously threatened things develop their best defenses. She read posture and eye movement, and the small tells of the hands and the jaw, and the way a person occupies the space around them. She read the way someone expected to be believed, or didn't, or was working to seem like they did. Cale Drummond read as someone who had no particular investment in what she thought of him, but who was paying her the compliment of full attention. "Victor Carnes," she said. "Tell me what you know." He's part of a network that operates primarily in the Northwest. They have resources and they have connections that reach into law enforcement and local government in certain areas. They have been active for at least 15 years. She kept her breathing even. 15 years. They had been operating for 4 years before her pack was targeted. She had not known that. In the years immediately after, she had been running too fast to research. "We have been tracking them for 3 years, Teal continued. "We came to this region because we had evidence that they were planning an operation targeting our pack's northern territory. We came here first to map their network before they could move." He paused. "We did not expect to find anything else." "But you found me," she said. "Soren identified you," he said. "It took him several days. You are very well covered." She did not respond to that. "Once we knew what you were," he said. "We knew Carnes finding you here was not a coincidence. They may have tracked your scent trail at some point in the years since you left the Northwest. We don't know how much they know about you. What we know is that he is currently building a picture of you in this town, and that picture, when complete, will go to people who will act on it." "How long do I have?" she asked. Direct. No point in softening the question. "We think 4 to 7 days before his report is complete enough to trigger a response." 4 to 7 days. She had done more with less. She looked at the mountains for a moment. The last of the amber light was fading out of the sky. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you to let us help," he said. "Why?" The question came out flat and honest, the way questions did when you had been alone long enough to stop worrying about how they sounded. Why would a pack she had never met, led by a man she had encountered 4 times, offer to involve themselves in her problem? He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking about how to say something accurately. "Because what happened to your pack was done by the same network we are here to stop," he said. "Because you survived something that was designed to leave no survivors, which means you are either very skilled or very determined, or both, and we have use for both. And because," he stopped briefly, "because you are alone, and you should not be." Lena held his gaze. "You know about my pack," she said. "Some of it. We have records. We have survivor testimony from people in the area at the time who saw what was left. It took us a while to connect it to the same network, but it connects." Survivor testimony. There had been other survivors then, or at least witnesses. She had not known that. She had run so completely and so fast that she had never known whether anyone else had seen, had reported, had tried to establish what happened. She pressed that down. Later. She would press that down and deal with it later. "How do you plan to handle Carnes?" she asked. "We are going to remove him from the picture before his report is complete," Cale said. Remove, in this context, means relocate to a place where he will be delayed significantly and his communications will be limited. Nothing permanent, nothing that creates more problems. And the rest of the network? That is the larger work. It has been the larger work for 3 years. It will not be finished in Harrow Creek. But Carnes can be handled. Carnes can be handled. What we need from you is information. What you know about their methods. How they approached your pack. What you saw. You were the only person who survived the initial event and had time to observe their approach before it happened. He was right. She had seen them moving in. She had been in the forest already, 2 miles out, and she had seen things on the way back that she had catalogued and carried with her and never shared with anyone, because there had been no one to share them with. And in exchange, she said, "You stay in your home," he said. "Your records stay clean. Your life here remains intact." He met her eyes. "And you are not alone in this." She stood in the cooling evening air and felt the weight of the offer settle over her. She had been alone for 10 years. She knew, in the way that only a decade of solitude can teach a person, the particular cost of that. Not just the practical cost, the deeper cost. The cost of having no one who knew what you actually were, of performing yourself constantly, of never being able to say a true thing without calculating the danger of it first. She also knew the cost of trusting the wrong people. She knew that cost in a way that did not require calculation, because it was written permanently into her body. "I need to think," she said. "Of course. 48 hours. 48 hours, he agreed. She turned to go. She had her hand on her car door when he spoke again. "The binding," he said. "How long ago?" She stopped, did not turn around. 10 years, she said. A silence. "It must have been very strong," he said, "to hold that long." She did not answer. She got in her car and drove out of the car park and did not look in the rearview mirror. But her hands, for the first time, were not steady at all. She drove home fast, not speeding, but with purpose, and she sat in her driveway for a long time after the engine was off, watching nothing, thinking everything. He had known. He had seen it, somehow, the binding. And he had said it must have been very strong, in a tone that was not impressed by the strength of it, but quietly troubled by the reason for it. She went inside. She did not sleep at all that night. She sat at the kitchen table with Harold on her lap, and she made lists in her head. Not written lists. She had long ago stopped writing things down. Mental lists, ordered and clear. What she knew, what she did not know, what she stood to gain, what she stood to lose. What she stood to lose was a life that was not fully real. What she stood to gain was help she desperately, privately, honestly needed. She sat there until the sky outside the window began to lighten from black to gray, and Harold moved from her lap to the counter, and the birds outside started their morning noise, and the mountains slowly became visible again as the darkness receded. By the time the sun reached the tree line, she had stopped making lists. She already knew the answer. She had known it somewhere underneath the thinking, since the moment on the mountain with the dog in her arms, since the moment in the waiting room when her wolf had pressed up like a tide against a wall, since the very first day when the hum in the morning air had told her that something had changed. She knew the answer. The question now was whether she was brave enough to act on it, or whether 10 years of careful hiding had hollowed out that particular quality so thoroughly that the word brave had become something that applied to other people in other stories, not to her. She got up from the table. She fed Harold. She made coffee. She thought about 31 people, and a silent forest in October, and about what it might mean to stop running from it and stand still long enough to see it properly. Then she picked up her phone. She had 48 hours. She was going to use all of them wisely, but the direction she was moving had become, overnight, clear. She just needed to be certain she was walking toward something, not simply toward a different version of the thing she had always been running from. 48 hours. She started counting. The 48 hours were the strangest 2 days of the past decade. Not because anything dramatic happened in them. They were, on the surface, ordinary. She worked her shift. She ate her meals. She slept for a few hours each night and woke before dawn and lay still in the dark, processing. What made them strange was the internal shift she could feel happening in parallel with the ordinary surface of things. Something in her had unclenched, just slightly. Not enough to notice from the outside, but enough that by Thursday morning, she was moving through the clinic with something she had not carried in years, which was the specific feeling of someone who has made a decision and is living in the hours before it takes effect. She spent her lunch break on Thursday writing. Not lists, not plans. A different kind of writing, the kind she had never allowed herself before. She wrote down everything she remembered about the week before the attack, every detail she had seen, the tracks she had noticed at the edge of their territory, the kind that could have been human or could have been something else. The vehicle she had seen twice on the road near the forest's edge, the 3 days when the usual background sounds of the forest had been quieter than normal. Not absent, but muted, the way animals go quiet when there is a disruption they cannot identify but can feel. She wrote it all down in precise, clear sentences, using the clinical precision she applied to everything she allowed herself to feel. And then she read it back, and was startled by how much she had retained. 10 years of not thinking about it had not erased a single detail. It had simply buried them, perfectly preserved, waiting. She folded the pages and put them in her jacket pocket. On Thursday evening, at 6:04, she sent a message to the blocked number. "I have information that may be useful. I'm willing to meet. Same location, Friday morning, 7 a.m. The reply came in 2 minutes. "We'll be there." All of us, or just me? She considered. Just you. And then, because she had been alone for 10 years and had learned that directness was not weakness but simply efficiency, "And bring coffee. Black." The reply this time took a full minute. She wondered if he was surprised, if he was smiling. She had no idea what he looked like when he smiled, and she caught herself wondering about this and stopped. Friday morning was cold and clear, the kind of autumn morning that smelled like the very best version of everything, pine and ice and clean air. She was at the trailhead at 10 to 7. He arrived at 6:58, which confirmed something she had suspected. He handed her a coffee cup before he said a word. She took it. They walked. Not up the trail. Along the edge of the car park, around the perimeter of the small cleared area, because she needed to be moving, and he seemed to understand this without being told. She talked. She told him about the week before the attack, every detail she had written down, and several more that came back as she spoke. The way that speaking a thing aloud unlocks parts of it that silent memory keeps sealed. She described the vehicles, the pattern of approach, the specific timing that suggested more than 2 people working in coordination. She described what she had seen when she came back to the forest that night, and what it had told her about how they had moved and where they had positioned themselves. He listened without interrupting. He did not take notes, which she had expected. He was, she understood, committing everything she said to a memory that was probably as precise as hers. Pack alphas were trained for that. Or perhaps he simply had the instinct for it. She did not yet know which was true. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "That matches the approach pattern we have from 2 other incidents," he said. "Both in the Northwest. Both in the past 12 years. 2 others." She had not known there were others. "How many?" she said. "With confirmed approach patterns that match yours." 2. With circumstantial evidence of the same network, 6 more over 15 years. 6. A number that made her very cold and very still. "Where are the survivors?" she asked. "Scattered. Most of them ran the way you did." He paused. "Some of them didn't survive the running." She absorbed that. "You're building a case," she said. "We are building a case, and we are building capacity to act on it," he said. 2 different things. The case requires testimony and documentation. The capacity requires resources and coordination. We have been working on both for 3 years. We are further along than we were." He looked at her. "What you just told me fills a significant gap." She looked at the mountains. "Good," she said. They stopped walking. They were standing near the edge of the car park, where the pines started, and the morning light came through in thin, cold bars. "There is something else I need to say to you," he said. She waited. "The binding," he said, "at this level of duration and strength, causes damage. Not to the human self, to the wolf." He stopped. He was choosing his words with unusual care, she noted. There is a point, in prolonged suppression, where the reconnection becomes significantly more difficult. We have seen this in lone shifters who have been isolated for extended periods. I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you something you may not know. She knew. She had known for a long time. She had simply not let herself think about it in those terms. How long before it becomes permanent, she said. We don't know exactly. It varies. 10 years is long. He looked at her steadily. You would know better than I would how intact the connection still is. She thought about the wolf pressing against the binding when he walked into a room. She thought about the mountain hollow, and the 40 meters into the trees, and the way she had reached inward on that fallen log, and felt something alive. It's still there, she said. Something in his expression shifted. Just slightly. She had no name for what she saw there. That matters, he said. More than you might realize right now. She looked at him for a moment. Then she finished her coffee and crushed the cup lightly and put it in her jacket pocket because she did not litter. What happens now? She asked. Carnes will be dealt with today, he said. His timeline is shorter than we estimated. Soren believes he may have made contact with his network last night. We need to move before any response is coordinated. Today, she said. This afternoon. And he won't know I was involved. He will not. He held her gaze. Your involvement is entirely optional. You can go to work, do your day, and let us handle this. And if something goes wrong, then you run, and we have already prepared a clean exit route for you from this town that leads to documentation that cannot be traced. She stared at him. You did that without asking me. We did that because it was the right thing to do, he said. You can use it or not. It exists regardless. She was quiet for a long moment. You are a complicated person, she said finally. He looked at her, and this time she thought she saw something that might have been the edge of a smile. Brief, controlled, but there. I have been told that before, he said. She left the trailhead at 7:35 and drove to the clinic and started her day. She checked in 2 cats and a geriatric Labrador and updated 6 patient files and organized the medication fridge and made Dr. Harmon his 10 o'clock tea and did every ordinary thing with the extraordinary steadiness of someone who has decided, deep in the place where decisions are actually made, that the ordinary life they built was worth fighting for. Not just surviving, worth fighting for. For the first time in 10 years, that distinction felt like it might mean something. Victor Carnes disappeared from Harrow Creek on a Friday afternoon, and by Saturday morning, no one in town had noticed he was gone. That was not a surprise to Lena. He had been asking questions quietly, in the way of someone who understood that visibility was a liability. He had no friends here, no lodgings that anyone local knew about. He was a ghost passing through, and ghosts, when they leave no obvious vacancy. Lena heard about it from Soren, who called her Saturday morning in the same professional, even tone as before, to tell her the situation had been handled and that Carnes would not be sending any reports for the foreseeable future. He offered no additional detail, and she did not ask for any. There will be others, Lena said. Yes, Soren said, but not soon. The network works slowly when they lose a contact. They wait to confirm information before sending anyone new. We estimate you have several weeks, possibly longer, before there is any further activity in this area. Several weeks. She turned that over. Not a solution. A window. Thank you, she said. Thank Cale, Soren said. This was his call. She did not call Cale to thank him. She was not sure how to do that, or whether it would communicate something she was not yet ready to communicate. Instead, she went to work, and she did her job, and she thought, on and off through the day, about the word window. A window was not a home, but it was a view, and she had been living without one for a long time. On Monday, Cale brought Gray in for her follow-up appointment. The dog's tendon was healing well. Lena demonstrated the range of movement, explained the return to activity protocol, and told him the dog would need one more check in a fortnight. The whole appointment was brief and professional, and at the end of it, just as before, Cale said something that had more weight than the words themselves. I'd like to talk, he said. Not about any of this. Just talk, if you're willing. She looked at him. That's a broad category. Coffee, he said. The diner, if you'd rather a public place, tomorrow after your shift. She wanted to say no. She understood, in the abstract, why saying no was the sensible thing. She had spent 10 years building good judgment around exactly these kinds of invitations, the kind that seemed simple, but that led, step by step, toward things she could not afford. 4:30, she said. The diner. He was already there when she arrived. He had a corner booth, which she appreciated without saying so, and he had ordered 2 coffees, and when she sat down, he did not start talking immediately, which she appreciated even more. They talked for 2 hours. Not about Carnes, or the network, or her pack, or any of the things that should have been the only subjects of a conversation between 2 people in their situation. They talked about the town, and the clinic, and the mountains, and about the particular quality of autumn at high elevation, and about animals they had worked with or cared for, and about books she had read, and things he had studied. She found out he had grown up further north, that he had taken on leadership of the Ashvale pack at a young age, under circumstances he described briefly, and without self-pity, that he had been doing the work of managing and protecting a large and complicated group of people for most of his adult life, and that he found it, most of the time, genuinely meaningful. She told him things she had not told anyone, small things, that she had wanted to be a botanist when she was 15, that she had learned to make bread during her first year alone because it gave her hands something to do, that she had read the same novel 12 times in 8 years, because it was the only book that had belonged to her mother that she had managed to keep. She did not tell him the novel's title. Some things were still too close. He did not push. He listened with the same focused attention she had noticed the first time, the kind that was neither performative nor analytical but simply present. And Lena sat across the diner table from him, and felt, with a clarity that was almost frightening, that she was having a real conversation for the first time in years. Not a performance, not a managed interaction, designed to establish and maintain a safe persona. A real conversation, with a real person, who knew, at least in part, who she actually was. It was extraordinary, and deeply uncomfortable, and she did not want it to end. When it did end, at 6:30, they walked out of the diner, into the cooling evening, and stood on the pavement for a moment, in the way that people stand, when the conversation has been good enough that leaving feels abrupt. "I should get back," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "This is complicated," she said. She meant the situation. She meant all of it. She was not sure she meant only the situation. "Most things worth doing are," he said. She walked to her car. She drove home. Harold met her at the door with the loud and specific complaint of a cat who has been left alone for an unconscionable number of hours. She sat on the kitchen floor with him and let him climb on her, and thought about 2 hours in a diner and how light she had felt at the end of them, which was not a feeling she had expected to recognize anymore. She also thought about Soren's call, and about Carnes, and about the fact that the window they had bought her was not endless. She thought about what it meant that the people at the Whitmore estate had chosen to use their resources on her problem without obligation or negotiation. She thought about what it meant that Cale Drummond had looked at her, for 2 hours across a diner table, like he was paying attention to someone real. She thought about the binding, still intact, but barely more than a thread, after 10 years. She thought about what he had said at the trailhead. The reconnection becomes significantly more difficult. There is a point. She had told herself that she would deal with that when it became urgent. She had been telling herself that for years. She was beginning to understand that it had been urgent for some time, and she had simply been choosing not to see it. Over the following week, a pattern developed without either of them officially naming it. Cale brought Gray for a check-in on Wednesday, which was not strictly necessary but which she did not mention. On Thursday, Soren came into the clinic with an actual patient, a short-haired cat named Admiral who turned out to have a mild ear infection, and who expressed his displeasure throughout the examination, in a tone that Soren bore with the patient dignity of someone accustomed to difficult personalities. Soren was quieter than Cale, and more watchful, and he looked at Lena with a steady, assessing attention that she recognized as the professional caution of someone responsible for other people's safety. She did not mind it. She understood it. On Friday, 2 more members of the Ashvale group came in for separate appointments, both with dogs, both referring themselves as colleagues of Cale Drummond. They were polite, direct, and looked at her with the specific kind of curiosity of people who had been briefed on her without having formed their own opinion yet. She treated their dogs with the same thoroughness she applied to every patient, and told them both to call if symptoms changed, and that was the extent of the interaction. But by the end of Friday, she understood something that she had not quite registered at the start of the week. The pack had been coming to her clinic, deliberately, one or two at a time, in a way that looked completely ordinary, but that she recognized, from the inside of a pack dynamic she had not experienced in 10 years, as intentional. They were not investigating her. They were, in the specific language of wolves, making themselves known, introducing themselves, the kind of slow, careful approach that a pack makes to a lone animal, that they want to feel safe, not overwhelmed. She stood in the empty clinic on Friday evening after the last patient left, and understood that she was being welcomed. Not loudly, not with ceremony, just steadily, in the way of people who understood what it meant to give a frightened thing enough space to decide for itself. She sat down on the plastic chair in the waiting room, the one nearest the window. She could see the car park and the road and the mountains beyond, already going dark. She had not been welcomed anywhere in 10 years. She had not known, until right now, sitting in the empty waiting room of a small mountain veterinary clinic, how much she had missed it. She allowed herself to feel that for a few minutes, not to manage it, or file it, or keep it at a safe distance, just to feel it, the way it was, which was large and complicated, and a little overwhelming, and underneath all of that, quietly, without fanfare, something very close to hope. Then she stood up, put on her coat, locked the clinic, and drove home. The mountains were dark on either side of the road. The pines were black against a sky that was just turning from deep blue to the first color of stars. She drove with both hands on the wheel, and her eyes on the road ahead, and she did not think about the go-bag under the bed, and she did not calculate exit routes, and she did not run the usual check. She drove home. She was beginning to understand that home was not a fixed thing. It was not the house, or the town, or the 8 years of ordinary routine. It was something she carried, or had once carried, and had thought she lost. Maybe it had only been buried. Maybe things that are buried do not always stay that way. She pulled into her driveway. The light was on in the front room. She had not left it on. She had not left any lights on. She was out of the car before the engine finished ticking quiet, every nerve awake, the wolf slamming against the binding with a force she had not felt in years. And then the front door opened, and Soren stood in the frame with his phone in his hand, and his expression set to the specific controlled urgency of someone delivering information that could not wait, and Lena understood before he said a word that the window had just closed. They had found her. Not Carnes, someone else, someone faster than Carnes. The week of ordinary things was over. Whatever came next was not going to be ordinary at all. "How did they get in?" she said. Her voice was calm. It surprised her. "They didn't," Soren said. "I came in the back. Your lock is straightforward to open from outside." She noted that without comment. She would think about that later. "When did you know?" 2 hours ago. "We intercepted a communication. Your address was in it." She pushed past him into the house. Harold was on the counter, tail rigid, ears back, his entire body communicating extreme displeasure in the specific way of a cat who has been confronted with an unfamiliar large male in his kitchen. She checked the back room first. The supply room, the bathroom. Habit, thorough. "Who sent it?" she said, coming back to the kitchen. "A contact in the network we haven't been able to identify yet. They communicated through 2 layers of relay. What we know is that the message was specific. Your name, your address, your shift schedule at the clinic." Her shift schedule. Someone had been watching the clinic. For longer than this week, probably. She thought about the past week of normal. The patients, the early mornings, the drive to work. Someone had been observing her routine. "When are they coming?" she said. "We don't know. The communication didn't specify a timeline. Our best estimate is 48 to 72 hours. She stood in her kitchen in her coat and thought very clearly and very fast. 48 to 72 hours was enough time, more than enough time if she used it correctly. She went to the back room. She pulled the go-bag from under the bed. She was already doing a mental inventory when she heard him in the doorway behind her. "You're not running," Soren said. She looked up. "Not a question," he said. "A statement of preference." "I've been running for 10 years, she said. "I'm very good at it." "You are," he agreed. "But running this time creates a different problem. They will simply follow. They know who you are now. The documents that protected you are compromised. Wherever you go, they will eventually find you again, and next time, they will be better prepared. She had already thought of this. She had thought of it in the 3 seconds between getting out of the car and reaching the front door. She had thought of it, and she had gone for the bag anyway, because it was the move her body knew, and her hands knew, and 10 years of practiced reflex had made automatic. So what is the alternative? She said. You stop running, Soren said. You let us handle this properly, and when it is over, you stop being a target, because the network that made you one no longer has the capacity to act on the information. She looked at the bag in her hands. Then she put it back under the bed. Not with relief, not with certainty, with the specific and difficult choice of someone who is walking away from the only safety mechanism they have trusted for a decade. Where is Kale? She said. On his way here, Soren said. She nodded once. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on, because she needed something to do with her hands, and because the situation, however extraordinary, was still occurring in a house in a small town, and small town things, like the kettle, still applied. She made 3 cups of tea. She was on the second when Kale arrived through the back door that Soren had left unlocked, which said something about how these people moved through the world, quietly, without ceremony, with the particular efficiency of people who had spent years being both careful and effective. He looked at her when he came in, not at the room, not at Soren, at her. The first question in his eyes was not about the intelligence or the plan or the timeline. It was asking if she was all right. She found that, despite everything, she was. Soren's told me, she said. I have questions. I know, he said. Ask them. So she asked them. Every question she had, practical and detailed and direct, and he answered them the same way, and Soren added information where it was relevant, and they sat at her kitchen table with the 3 cups of tea getting cold, and worked through it, with the focused, methodical attention that the situation required. They were at it until midnight. By midnight, she understood the plan. By midnight, she had given her input on the parts that touched directly on her safety. By midnight, she had agreed to 3 things. Stay in the house tonight, go to work tomorrow as normal, and be reachable at all times until it was over. Soren left first. Kale stayed a few minutes longer. He stood at the back door with his hand on the frame, and he looked at her across her kitchen, and he said something that she had not expected him to say. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. For what happened to your pack. For the 10 years after. For the fact that you had to build an entire life on a false foundation to stay alive. None of it should have happened. Lena stood by the kitchen counter and held the apology, and understood that it was not his responsibility to give it, and that he had given it anyway. Thank you, she said. And then, because the night was late, and she was very tired, and she had used up the reserves she kept for protecting herself from things that were too real, I'm glad you came to this town. He was quiet for a moment. So am I, he said. He left through the back door. She heard his footsteps on the garden path, and then the gate, and then nothing. She stood in her kitchen for a long time. Harold materialized from wherever he had retreated during the visit and pressed himself against her ankles with the determined warmth of an animal who has sensed that something large is happening and has appointed himself the solution. She sat on the kitchen floor with him in her lap. 48 to 72 hours. She had been afraid so many times that she had almost stopped registering it as an event. It was simply a texture, a state she moved in and out of the way other people moved in and out of traffic. But this fear was different, not smaller, different in quality. Because for the first time in 10 years, she was not facing it alone. That should have been a comfort. She was learning, slowly, to let it be one. She went to work the next morning. She signed in, she made coffee, she checked in the first patient of the day, a terrier named Clarence with a recurring ear issue, and she did all of it with the same steady, professional exterior that she had been maintaining for 8 years in this town, and before that in 3 others, and before that for the 2 years after the forest in October, when she had still been learning how to be a person who looked like someone who had never had a forest in October. Internally, she was running every calculation she had. Soren had placed 2 of the Ashvale group within sight of the clinic. She knew this because he had told her, and because she had seen the vehicle parked at the edge of the car park when she arrived, and she had seen, from the corner of her eye without turning her head, the figure at the corner of the diner building across the road, who was not looking at her, but was positioned to see anyone who approached the clinic. She was under protection for the first time in 10 years. She was not sure how she felt about that. Grateful, yes, but it also meant, in the most direct way possible, that there was something to protect against. It made the threat tangible and close, in a way that the abstract knowledge of it, in the form of Soren's phone call, had not fully achieved. She worked. She counted the hours. She kept her phone in her coat pocket and checked it between patients, which was not her usual habit, and which Dr. Harmon did not appear to notice. At noon, Cale came in. Not for an appointment. He walked through the front door at 12:03 and stood at the front desk and said, quietly, that he had an update and asked if she had 5 minutes. Dr. Harmon was eating his lunch in the back office. Lena took Cale to the empty examination room and closed the door. The timeline has moved, he said. She looked at him. How far? Tonight. We believe they are moving earlier than we estimated. There were communications this morning suggesting accelerated activity. Tonight, the word landed with the specific weight of something that had been theoretical becoming actual. Are your people in place? She asked. They are. He looked at her steadily. I want you to leave the clinic at your normal time. Drive home your normal route. Go inside. Do everything exactly as you always do on a Tuesday evening. You want me to be the bait, she said. No, he said, and there was a firmness in the word that surprised her. I want you to be the reason they come to a location where we control the variables. There is a difference. You will not be in danger. You cannot guarantee that. No, he agreed. I cannot guarantee anything. What I can tell you is that I have 6 people positioned in a pattern around your house and the surrounding block that covers every approach, and that not one of them will let anything reach your front door. 6 people, around her house, on a Tuesday evening in a small mountain town that had no idea any of this was happening. She thought about that for a moment. The sheer scale of what he had organized, quietly, around one person who had no official standing with his pack, no ties, no claim. Why? She said. He looked at her. Because you matter, he said. Simple, direct, no elaboration. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about 10 years of being someone who did not matter to anyone, in any real way. Not because she was not loved, or because she was not capable of connection, but because connection required truth, and truth required trust, and trust was the one thing she had not been able to afford. All right, she said. There is one more thing, he said. When it's over tonight, I need to ask you something. About the future. Not tonight. Tomorrow. What kind of question? The kind that you deserve to have the chance to answer without a crisis happening at the same time, he said. She looked at him. That's very considerate. I try to be, he said, and there it was again, the edge of something in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. She went back to work. She worked until 5:30, which was her normal time, and she said her normal goodbyes to Dr. Harmon, and she drove home her normal way, and she let herself into her house, and fed Harold, and put the kettle on, and drew the curtains in the living room, because it was getting dark, and that was what she did at this hour on autumn evenings. Then she sat down at the kitchen table with her cup of tea, and she waited. She was not afraid, or rather, she was afraid, but it was a clean fear, the kind that sharpens rather than paralyzes. She had been in situations of danger before, not many, but enough to know the difference between the fear that helped you and the fear that undid you. This was the fear that helped. At 7:14, she heard something at the back of the house. Not a sound, an absence. The particular absence of sound that meant the garden had gone quiet. Birds, a neighbor's dog a block over, the small background noise of an ordinary evening, all of it was still. She did not move from the table. She heard, very faintly, something she could not identify. A footstep on the garden path, perhaps, or the gate, or someone who was very careful and had not been careful enough. Then she heard, from outside, a sound that she had not heard directed at anything for 3 years, the specific, controlled sound of people who were very good at their work, doing it very fast. It was over in less than 4 minutes. She counted. At 7:20, Soren knocked on her back door and told her it was done. 2 individuals, approached from the perimeter, both subdued, no one hurt. She nodded. She offered him tea. He declined. He gave her a brief operational summary in 3 sentences and left. Cale came in through the back 5 minutes later. He did not immediately say anything. He looked at her across the kitchen, and she looked back, and something in the expression they shared was not triumphant. It was the particular quiet of people who have been braced for something and are now slowly breathing it out. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, more honestly, "Ask me again in an hour." He sat down at her kitchen table. She sat across from him. Harold arrived and made his usual territorial inspection of the visitor, and then settled on the chair between them, apparently satisfied. She told him about the 4 minutes, how she had heard the silence come down, how she had counted. He listened. "You counted," he said. "I needed something to do." He was quiet for a moment. "That's very controlled." 10 years of practice, she said. They sat there for a while. The house was quiet. Outside, she knew, 2 of his people were still positioned at the perimeter. She did not mind. The protection felt different now than it had 12 hours ago, not like constraint, like something earned. "You said you had a question," she said. "Tomorrow. But if tonight counts as a crisis that's now mostly resolved." "Tonight counts," he said. "Tomorrow." She looked at him. "You're very consistent." "I try to be," he said again. And this time she did see it properly. The small, brief, entirely genuine smile that appeared when he said something he found marginally funny, and allowed himself to show it. It changed his face considerably. She noted this with the careful attention she paid to everything, and then stopped noting it, and looked at the table instead. He stayed another 20 minutes, and then went back to the estate. She washed both mugs, dried them, put them away. She stood at the kitchen window in the dark and looked at the place where the mountain was, invisible now but present, enormous and quiet behind the tree line. She thought about tomorrow and the question she was apparently going to be asked. She thought about what it might be. She could narrow it down to a few possibilities, and she ran through each of them, and her response to each, the way she ran through everything, methodically, honestly, without flinching from what the honest answer was. Some of those answers surprised her. Not the words of the answers, the feeling behind them. She went to bed at 10. She slept. Not perfectly, not without waking once, but she slept, which was already more than she had managed the previous 2 nights. In the morning, she got up and made breakfast, and looked out the kitchen window, at a sky that was pale and cold and entirely clear, the kind of sky that the mountains looked best against, all that granite and pine against the clean pale blue, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time, and almost did not recognize. She felt like she was standing in her own life, not performing it, not managing it, actually in it. She stood at the window until the coffee was ready, and then she poured a cup and sat at the kitchen table, and she waited for the question she was going to be asked, and she was not afraid of it. For perhaps the first time since she was 19 years old, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She did not know what came next, but she was ready for it. That was new. That was entirely new. And it felt, in the most unexpected and unfamiliar way, like the beginning of something real. He arrived at 9 in the morning, while she was still at the kitchen table with her second coffee. She had left the back door unlocked. She noted, with a kind of dry amusement that felt new and welcome, that this was the first time in 10 years she had left any door in any house unlocked, with full knowledge that someone was coming through it. He knocked anyway. "It's open," she said. He came in and sat down across from her, and she pushed the second mug of coffee toward him, because she had made 2, and he accepted it without comment, which meant he was also someone who had observed that she took her coffee black and had a reasonable memory. She waited. He looked at the table for a moment, and she understood, from the quality of his stillness, that he was thinking about how to begin something he had been considering for some time. "When we came to this area," he said, "I told Soren it was for the network. That was true. But it was not the only thing that brought us here." She looked at him. "A member of our pack," he said, "spent his last weeks trying to track the survivors of your pack's attack. He had been working on it for 2 years on his own time, without being asked. He was a historian by training. He believed that what happened in the Northwest needed to be documented, and that the survivors, wherever they were, deserved to know that someone was still trying to find them. He paused. He died 8 months ago. Not because of this. He was old. But before he died, he told me about a name. A first name, a description, and a town in the mountain north, where a young woman who might fit that description had lived for several years before moving on. Lena was very still. It took another 6 months to narrow it down, he said. The trail you left was almost nothing. Almost. He looked at her. When Soren confirmed it was you, I came here because I had promised a dying man that I would. She said nothing for a moment. What did you promise him? She said. That if there were survivors who could be found, I would find them, he said. And that when I found them, I would not make them feel like a problem that needed solving. I would make them feel like what they were. Which is, she said quietly, people who survived something impossible, he said, who deserve to be seen for that. Lena looked at the table. She looked at her coffee. She pressed both palms flat against the table surface, which was a habit of hers, a grounding thing, one she had never fully explained even to herself. The question, she said. Yes, he said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said it plainly. The way she had come to understand, he said most things that mattered, directly and without decoration. I want you to know, he said, what I believe you have a right to know, which is that what I feel when I am in this room with you is not professional interest or strategic consideration, or even the specific sense of responsibility that comes from the promise I made. It is something else, something that I am not going to name without your permission, and that I will not act on, and will not raise again if you tell me you do not want me to. Lena's hands were flat on the table. You're being very careful, she said. You have had enough people take things from you without asking, he said. I am asking. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the 8 years in this town. She thought about the years before it. She thought about the 19-year-old who had driven north in the dark and the 29-year-old who had spent a decade becoming someone who did not need anyone. She thought about what she had felt, carrying a dog down a mountain, for just a moment. The warmth of something she had not expected to feel and could not explain away. She thought about what her wolf had done, from the first moment, with this man. Not the fearful press against a threat. Something else entirely. Something she had not let herself name. She named it now. The thing you're not naming, she said. I know what it is. He waited. I've known since the first week, she said. I've been trying very hard not to know it. I'm aware, he said, and there was something in his voice that was both careful and warm. She looked at him steadily. I am not someone who does things simply, she said. I don't have a simple history. I don't have a simple present. I have more walls than most buildings, and I am not sure I know how to take them down even if I want to. I know, he said. And the situation is complicated, she said. You have a pack. I have a life. Here that I built alone. The network is still active, and my safety is not guaranteed. And there are 100 practical reasons why anything between us would be difficult. I know, he said again. So, she said. So I'm not asking you for certainty, he said. I'm asking if I can keep having coffee at your kitchen table. She looked at him, he looked back. And that edge of a smile was there again. Small and genuine, and entirely understated. And she understood that he was asking her something enormous, in the smallest possible language. Because he was someone who had learned to be careful with the weight of things. She picked up her coffee cup. The coffee is going cold, she said. He picked up his. They drank it. Outside, the pale autumn sky was bright and wide above the mountains, and the pines were dark against it, and a hawk moved in a long, slow circle over the ridge, and the morning was very quiet, and very real, and entirely present. Lena sat at her kitchen table with the walls still up, most of them, but with one door open that she had not intended to open, and that she was not, for the first time in a very long time, in any hurry to close. It was a beginning, careful and complicated and entirely uncertain. That was all right. She had learned, over 10 years of surviving, that the things worth keeping were always somewhat uncertain. The certain things were the ones you built alone and locked behind doors and called safe, and they were safe, but they were also empty. She was done with empty. She did not say this out loud. She did not need to. He was, she suspected, already aware. 3 days after the two men were removed from her back garden, Cale stood in the middle of a room at the Whitmore estate with 7 of his pack members and told them who Lena was. Not what she was, who. He told them her story, the way he understood it, which was not complete, but was honest about what it lacked. He told them that she was a lone survivor of a targeted attack, that she had lived in this town for 8 years, under a name that was not her own, that she had done this because she had no other viable option, and that she had endured a decade of solitude that would have destroyed a significant number of people, and had not destroyed her. He told them that she was not asking to join anything, and that he was not offering anything on her behalf without her knowledge. He was telling them this because they would see her more often at the clinic, because some of them had already begun establishing contact in their own quiet ways, and because they deserved to understand who they were dealing with. He told them one more thing. He told them that he believed the bond between himself and Lena Vasic was the fated mate bond, that he was not certain, because certainty in this particular matter required her wolf to be fully present, and her wolf had been suppressed for 10 years, but that his own bond sense, which he trusted, and which had never before been activated by any person in his life, had been insistent and unmistakable from the first morning he had walked into a veterinary clinic in a mountain town, and a woman had handed him a clipboard and looked at him with the specific expression of someone who was trying very hard not to react to something. The room was quiet when he finished. Soren, who had been standing by the window, said simply, "That explains the clinic visits." Owen, the youngest of the inner circle, a 24-year-old with an earnest face and the good sense to think before speaking, asked whether Lena knew. "She knows something," Cale said. Petra, who managed logistics and had joined the Ashvale Pack 8 years ago after her own complicated journey, and who had therefore a particular frame of reference for what complicated journeys did to people, asked what Lena needed most right now. "Time," Cale said. "Space to make her own choices, and people who don't require her to perform anything." Petra nodded. She looked like someone who had filed that information and would act on it in her own way and her own time, which Cale knew was exactly what she would do. The meeting was brief and practical and direct. There was no drama in it. These were people who had been through enough complicated situations together that they had developed a collective instinct for which things required extensive processing, and which things simply needed to be said clearly and allowed to settle. After the others left, Soren stayed. "You should have told them sooner," he said. "I know," Cale said. "She should be told what you told them." "I've told her the parts that are mine to say," Cale said. "The rest belongs to her wolf, when it's ready." Soren was quiet for a moment. He had a way of being quiet that communicated significant volumes of opinion without requiring words to carry them. "You are," he said finally, handling this with an unusual amount of patience. "She spent 10 years being pushed by a situation she didn't choose," Cale said. "I'm not going to be another thing that pushes her." Soren looked at him for a moment. "That is either very wise or very slow," he said. "Possibly both." "Probably both," Cale said. Lena, during these same 3 days, was doing something she had not done in 10 years. She was talking to people. Not in the managed, careful way that she talked to Dr. Harmon, or to Carol the school teacher, or to any of the ordinary people of Harrow Creek who knew the performing version of her. She was talking to Petra, who turned up at the clinic on Thursday with a genuinely ailing husky named Scout, and who stayed after the appointment for 20 minutes discussing, with complete directness and no apparent agenda, what it was like to come into a pack as an adult from the outside. Petra said 2 things that stayed with Lena for the rest of the week. The first was that belonging was not the same as fitting. Fitting was a performance. Belonging was something that happened when a person stopped modifying themselves to suit the room, and the room simply made space for who they actually were. The second was that the hardest part of belonging, after a long time alone, was not trust. It was the specific discomfort of being seen and not being able to do anything about it. "You get used to it," Petra said. "I'm not sure I will," Lena said honestly. "That's exactly what I said," Petra told her, word for word. "I said it to Cale, actually, about 8 months in. He said that getting used to it was not the point, and that the point was continuing to show up, even when it was uncomfortable." "And?" Lena said. "And he was right," Petra said, with the tone of someone who found this slightly annoying. "He usually is. It's one of his less charming qualities. Lena smiled. It was genuine. She noticed it happening without planning it, which was still a somewhat unusual experience. On Friday evening, 2 weeks after the night with the go bag, Lena drove up the estate road for the first time. She had been invited for dinner, the whole group. Cale had asked in the same quiet, direct, no-pressure way he asked everything, and she had said yes, because she was, slowly and imperfectly, and with considerable internal negotiation, learning to say yes to things. The estate was different inside the gate than it was from the mountain trail. The house was old and solid, and had been recently made comfortable without being made glossy, the kind of renovation done by people who cared about function and warmth over appearance. Inside, it smelled like wood smoke and coffee, and several dogs in various states of health and muddy coats. There were 8 people there, including Soren and Petra, plus the 2 dogs she had treated, and 3 she had not yet met. There was food on a large table, and a fire in the hearth, and a lot of overlapping, comfortable, easy conversation, of the kind that happens between people who know each other well, and are not performing for anyone. They made space for her, naturally, without fuss. She was given a chair near the fire, which was the best chair, and no one made a speech about it, and Scout the Husky immediately annexed her feet for the duration of the evening. She ate dinner with 8 people she had known for 2 weeks, and 1 cat she had left at home with an extra portion of food and significant guilt. It was the best evening she had spent in 10 years. Not because anything particularly dramatic happened, because nothing needed to. She sat in a room full of warm light and actual conversation, and the specific easy warmth of people who were not asking her to be anything other than what she was in that particular moment, which was tired and cautious, and still learning the shape of things, and grateful in a way she did not yet have the right words for. After dinner, she helped clear the table. Petra washed dishes with her. Owen told a story about the husky that was genuinely funny, and involved a significant quantity of mud and a misunderstanding about what could be stored in the downstairs bathroom. Soren said something dry from the corner that made 3 people laugh at once. Cale sat across the room and talked to the 2 older members of the group, and occasionally, in the way of someone who was not watching but was aware, glanced in her direction. She noted this without turning it into anything more than what it was, which was someone being aware of someone else in a room. She stayed until 9. At the door, he handed her a folded piece of paper. She looked at it. "The historian," he said. "The one I mentioned. He left notes. About the Northwest Pack, about the attack, about everything he found in his research. I thought you should have them." He paused. "Only if you want them. I can hold on to them longer if you're not ready." She took the paper. She drove home with it on the passenger seat, unread. She fed Harold. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the folded paper for a long time. Then she opened it. The historian's name, she learned, had been Martin Fole. He had been 72 when he died. He had spent 2 years, in his own time, trying to piece together what had happened to a small pack in the Pacific Northwest, because he believed, as he had written in the notes, that the things done in darkness deserved to be brought into the light, and that people who survived were owed at least the acknowledgement that their suffering was real, and that someone had noticed. His notes were careful and thorough, and written with the specific respect of someone who understood that he was handling other people's losses, and that this required precision and kindness in equal measure. She read them all. She read about her pack as an outsider had seen them, through the limited records and third-hand accounts that Martin Fole had been able to gather. Small things. The name of the Alpha, which she already knew. The territory description. 2 testimonies from people in the broader shifter community who had heard, later, what had happened, and had expressed grief. An account of what had been found when others, eventually, came to verify. She read until midnight. Then she put the papers down, and she sat in her kitchen in the very late hour of a Friday night, and she allowed herself, for a long time, to grieve properly. Not the controlled, managed, carefully limited version of grief she had permitted herself over the years. The actual thing. It was not quiet. It was not dignified. It was the kind of grief that had been waiting 10 years for the right conditions to be expressed, and the right conditions were, apparently, a kitchen table in a small mountain town, a cat asleep nearby, a folder of notes written by a kind old man who had cared about people he had never met. She sat with it until it was done. It took a while. Afterward, she washed her face, made more tea, and sat with the quiet feeling that comes after a long storm. Not better, not fixed, but present. Fully, completely, honestly present in her own life, in a way she had been avoiding, and managing, and sidestepping for 10 years. She thought about Martin Fole. She thought about a man who had spent 2 years of his life trying to do something kind for people he would never meet, and who had left this world having done it. She decided that deserved to be honored. She thought about how to do that. By the time the first light came through the kitchen window, she had an answer. She was going to stop hiding. Not immediately, not recklessly, not without planning and care and the practical steps that needed to be taken first. But she was going to stop making her life small in order to keep it. She was going to stop treating safety as the only thing worth having. She picked up her phone. She texted Cale. I read the notes. Thank you for keeping them for me. Can we talk tomorrow? The reply came in 3 minutes. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. I'll bring the coffee. She put the phone down. She looked at Harold. Things are changing, she told him. He blinked at her slowly, in the way of cats who have already decided about a situation and are waiting for the relevant human to catch up. She went to bed. She slept deeply, without waking, until the alarm went at 7. The mountains outside the window were bright in the morning light. They had been there all along. They had not moved. They had simply waited. She understood the feeling. He arrived at 8 with 2 cups from the diner, and sat across from her in the by now familiar arrangement of 2 people at a kitchen table, with a cat, offering his unsolicited presence between them. I want to tell you something, she said. All right? She had spent the early morning hours organizing her thoughts, which was the method she used for everything important. She laid them out now, in the same order she had arranged them in her head. I have been managing my life, she said, the way you manage a patient who is stable but fragile. Keep everything level, no sudden movements, no changes, nothing that could destabilize the thing I built. She paused. I built something stable, but stable is not the same as whole. He waited. He was good at that. I want to start working towards something whole, she said. That includes the binding. That includes my actual name on actual paperwork at some point, when it is safe enough to do that. That includes, she stopped briefly, being honest about what I am, and who I am to the people I am choosing to be around. That's a significant set of choices, he said. I know, she said. I've been thinking about it all night. And today you're telling me. I'm telling you first, she said, because you asked me a question in this kitchen a few days ago that I didn't fully answer, and the fuller answer is, yes. To the coffee, to whatever is or isn't happening here, to all of it, with the understanding that I am going to be difficult about it sometimes, and that I still have 100 walls, and that I do not know how to do any of this the easy way, because the easy way has not been available to me for 10 years. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not looking for easy, he said. Good, she said, because I can promise you something real, and I can promise you honest, and I can promise you that I will tell you the truth, even when the truth is that I don't know what I'm doing. But easy is off the table. Lena, he said. She looked at him. I have been running a large, complicated pack of people for 9 years, he said. I have never once been looking for easy. She looked at him steadily. Something in her chest that had been tight for 10 years, not the grief, that was different, but something older and tighter, shifted. She picked up her coffee. Right, she said. Right, he agreed. They drank their coffee. Harold walked across the table between them with the imperious disregard for social conventions that made him the only genuinely confident creature in the room, and both of them watched him go, and somewhere in the watching of a cat cross a kitchen table, something that had been complicated became, for a moment, simply warm. It was not a resolution, it was not an ending. It was a beginning, which was exactly what it had always been about to be. From the morning a man had come into a veterinary clinic, and a woman had handed him a clipboard, and her wolf had pressed against 10 years of silence, like a tide finding its shore. Outside, the mountains stood bright and patient in the morning light, and the town went about its ordinary business, and the pines said nothing, as pines always do, which is to say, everything worth saying about endurance and patience and the particular dignity of simply remaining. Lena sat at her kitchen table in the morning light and drank her coffee. She was going to be all right. She realized, been all right for some time. She had simply not known how to let herself believe it. She was learning. The first time she shifted in 10 years did not happen in a controlled situation. It was not planned. It was not the result of a careful, methodical decision about the right time and the right place and the right level of readiness. It happened on a Wednesday evening in late November, and it happened because 3 armed people came over the wall of her back garden in the dark, and her wolf did not ask for permission. She had been in the back room when she heard the gate, which she should not have been able to hear from that distance, which meant that the binding was already loosening at that point, in ways she had not fully registered. She had come to the kitchen and had seen the back door rattling, and had already been backing toward the front of the house when the first of them came through the window in the back room she had just left. She ran. Not out the front door. That was what they would expect. She went up the stairs instead, moving faster than she had moved in years. And she made it to the back bedroom window and went through it, and dropped to the shed roof below, and from there to the garden, which put the house between herself and the people who had come through her back window, and she ran for the tree line. She had no phone. She had left it in the kitchen. She had nothing, except what she was wearing, and the animal instinct she had spent 10 years suppressing. And that instinct was not suppressed anymore. It was completely present, every cell of it awake and loud and pushing. She hit the tree line at a run, and the binding broke. There was no metaphor for it, no elegant way to describe it. It broke the way a thing breaks when it has been held too long under too much pressure, all at once, completely, with a force that knocked her off her feet. She hit the ground on all fours, and it was the ground she hit, not her knees, because by the time she reached the earth, she was no longer in the form that had knees. The shift took 4 seconds. It should have been agony after 10 years. It was not entirely comfortable. But it was also not agony. It was more like taking a breath after having been underwater for an extremely long time. The kind of breath that is borderline violent because the body is so desperate for it. She came up in her wolf form in the dark of the forest, and she was, for the first time in a decade, completely herself. Not Lena Vasek, veterinary nurse, small mountain town. Careful, contained, ordinary. All of that was still there. It would always be there. It was 10 years of her, and she would not have given it back. But underneath it, and equally real, was this. The wolf. The part of her that saw the dark forest as light, that heard the 3 people in her back garden as though they were standing beside her, that understood the slope of the mountain, and the direction of the wind, and the distance to the estate road, in a way that the human mind simply could not calculate. She ran. She ran in the specific way that wolves run when they are not being cautious, not managing, not holding anything back, and it was extraordinary. It was like remembering a language she had thought was lost. The forest came alive around her. Cold air and pine and the smell of earth and the distant creek and the sounds of everything that moved in the dark. She was heading for the estate. She knew where it was from here, with a precision that no map could provide. She was less than a kilometer from the forest edge when she heard them behind her. Not the 3 from her garden. They were still too far back and too slow. Different footsteps, lighter, familiar. Kale came out of the trees to her left, not in human form. He shifted back as he came alongside her, and she stopped, and they stood in the dark forest, and he looked at her with an expression she could not fully read, but that contained, unmistakably, relief. "I got your message," he said, which was not what she had expected him to say. "I didn't send a message," she said. Her voice was her own. She was back in human form without having fully decided to shift, which meant the shift in both directions was going to be easier than she had thought. That was good information. "Not a phone message," he said. She understood. The bond. It was fully present now, both of them in the dark forest with no bindings between them, and it was not subtle. It was the most direct and immediate form of communication she had ever experienced, bypassing everything she had ever used to mediate her interactions with other people. No performance, no management, no calculation. Just this. "The 3 from my garden," she said. "Soren has them," he said. "We had people on the perimeter. We saw them come in. We were moving, but you moved faster." "I shifted," she said. "I know," he said. He looked at her for a moment in the dark. "How does it feel?" She thought about the 4 seconds on the forest floor. She thought about the run through the trees. She thought about what it had been like to be completely present in her own body for the first time in 10 years. "It feels like something I should have done a long time ago," she said. "You weren't ready," he said, simply, without judgment. "No," she said, "I wasn't." They walked back through the forest to the estate. Not quickly. The emergency was handled, and neither of them moved as if there was any further urgency. The night was cold and clear, and the stars above the canopy were extremely bright. "3 people in one evening," she said. "The network is escalating." "Yes," he said. "This changes our timeline. We need to act on the larger structure before they can send anyone else." "What does that mean practically?" she said. "It means we move in the next week," he said. "We have the intelligence, we have the capacity. We have been waiting for one more piece of evidence, and tonight's events give us that piece." He glanced at her. "It also means you cannot stay in the house." She thought about the house, the lavender, Harold. "The cat," she said. "He can come," Sale said. She looked at him. He was completely serious. "He can absolutely come," he said. She looked at the stars through the canopy. "All right," she said. They reached the edge of the forest and crossed onto the estate grounds, and the lights of the big house were on ahead of them, warm and steady, and through the windows she could see people moving around in the way that people move when they are organized and in motion. Inside, the mood was focused. Soren was at the large table with maps and a laptop and 2 other people she recognized from the dinner. Owen was on the phone. Petra was organizing supplies with the specific efficiency of someone who had prepared for exactly this kind of rapid movement before. No one made a fuss about the fact that Lena had arrived on foot from the forest, slightly disheveled, clearly having just shifted for the first time in a decade. Petra looked up from the supply table and said, "There's tea. The good kind, not the cheap stuff." Soren looked over briefly and said, "Glad you're here," then went back to the map. Owen ended his phone call and said, "The clinic will be covered. Dr. Harmon won't know anything has changed until you're ready to tell him." She stood in the middle of this organized, purposeful room full of people who had, in the past few weeks, decided without ceremony that she was one of them, and she felt the specific and unfamiliar experience of being caught. Not caught in the sense of being found out. Caught in the sense of being held, of having people around her who would, without being asked, quietly ensure that the things she cared about were taken care of while she was dealing with larger things. She had forgotten what that felt like. She sat down at the table with the tea that Petra had pointed her toward, and she listened to Soren's briefing on the plan, which was detailed and precise, and told her that the past 3 years of careful work had built towards something that was now ready to be deployed. She listened, and she asked questions, and she offered, twice, information from her own memory of the network's methods that was relevant, and that Soren incorporated without comment. Harold arrived at the estate at 11, transported in his carrier by the youngest member of the group, who had gone to fetch him, and who reported that the cat had been extremely unimpressed by the carrier, but had been easily bribed with the treats stored in the kitchen cupboard, the location of which the young man had found, by a process of logical search, that Harold had supervised from the counter. Harold was released from the carrier in the living room, spent 20 minutes performing a comprehensive inspection of the entire ground floor, and then settled on the best chair by the fire. Lena watched him settle and felt, underneath the tension of the evening and the strangeness of the shift, and the reality, that the next week was going to be the most complicated of the past 10 years, something that sat quietly at the base of everything else. She was not alone. She had not been alone. She was beginning to understand, since the morning 3 weeks ago, when a man had walked into her clinic, and her wolf had pressed against 10 years of silence, and something had finally, irreversibly, begun to change. She looked at the fire. She looked at Harold, profoundly comfortable, in someone else's best chair, entirely at home in a room he had been in for 20 minutes. She looked at the people around the table. She thought about Martin Foale, the old historian, who had spent 2 years trying to do something kind for people he would never meet. She thought about what it meant to honor that. Then she went back to the table and got back to work. There was a great deal to do, and she intended to do her part of it. All of it. For the first time in 10 years, she was not planning an exit. She was planning a future. The distinction was not small. It was, in fact, everything. The week that followed was the most active of her adult life. She did not go back to the house. The clinic visits continued, because Dr. Harmon could not manage the patient load alone, and because Lena had made 8 years of commitments to animals that needed care, and she was not going to abandon them for her own convenience. Each morning she drove down from the estate in the early hours and was at the clinic before it opened. And each evening she came back up the mountain road, and the routine of it was strange and also, underneath the strangeness, grounding. Dr. Harmon, she told, as little as necessary. She told him there had been a break-in at the house and that she was staying elsewhere for a while for her own peace of mind. He accepted this with the uncomplicated concern of a decent man who trusted her judgment, and he said he was sorry to hear it, and that she should take all the time she needed, and that was the extent of it. She appreciated him more than she usually let herself show. She showed it more than usual that week. At the estate, the work continued at a pace that surprised her, not because she had underestimated what the Ashvale group was capable of, but because seeing it in operation was different from understanding it in the abstract. These were not people who moved in theory. They moved in practice, with the specific, tight efficiency of a group that had been operating together under difficult conditions for long enough to have eliminated most of their own inefficiencies. She contributed what she could. Her testimony, formally given to Soren on the second day, was recorded and documented with a thoroughness that felt, for the first time, like justice being assembled, rather than grief being managed. She answered every question completely. She did not protect herself from the difficulty of the material, which was considerable, and Soren did not ask her to. What he asked was simply that she be accurate, and she was. She spent an afternoon with Petra and 2 others going over the approach patterns she had documented, and the conversation was professional and detailed, and completely devoid of the particular kind of pity she had been afraid of, the kind that made the person being pitied feel like a subject rather than a person. She was not a subject in this room. She was a resource and a colleague, and someone whose knowledge mattered for practical reasons. She found this considerably easier to sit with than sympathy would have been. On the 4th day, Cale asked her to do something that was not professional at all. He asked her to come with him to the forest, not for any tactical reason, not to survey terrain or establish a position. He asked her to come because, he said, the shift she had done in the dark during an emergency was not the same as shifting in a moment of choice, and that the difference mattered. She understood what he meant. She had thought about it herself. They went in the late afternoon, when the light was still in the sky but beginning to angle low and golden through the trees. The forest here was older than the parts she usually hiked, the trees larger, the undergrowth less dense, the light reaching the ground in broader, warmer bars. She shifted in full daylight, with full intention, without any emergency to drive it. It was different, completely different. The emergency shift had been pure instinct taking over. This was choice. This was standing in the forest in the late afternoon light and choosing to come back to herself. Because that was what it was. Not a departure from who she was. A return. She stood in her wolf form in the amber forest light, and Cale stood in his, and the bond between them, which had been audible since the night of the emergency in a way it had not been before, was completely clear now. Not loud, not overwhelming. Simply present, in the way that a person's own heartbeat is present. Constant, quiet, undeniable, entirely real. They ran for an hour in the forest, not urgently, not from anything, just ran, because running was the thing wolves do, when the world opens up, and the ground is good, and there is someone worth running with. She had not run like that in 10 years. She had forgotten the specific joy of it, not the escape of it, not the survival of it, the joy. The simple animal delight of a body doing what it was designed to do, moving through the world at its own real speed, without performance, without management, without anything held back. When they came back to the forest edge in the long last light, she was breathing hard and entirely present, and, in the way she had not allowed herself to use the word in 10 years, happy. Not the managed absence of distress that she had called contentment. Actually happy. "You're fast," he said. He was also breathing hard. "I used to be faster," she said. "The binding slows the muscle memory. It will come back." She looked at him. "You sound very certain." "I am very certain," he said. She looked at the forest they had come through. The light was almost gone now. the trees going from amber to gray, the sky above them deepening. "We should go back," she said. "We should," he agreed. Neither of them moved immediately. "Thank you," she said, "for this." "You needed it," he said. "You didn't have to know that," she said. "I know," he said. "I just did." She looked at him for a moment. The bond was very clear, and she was not managing it anymore, not filtering it, not keeping it at a careful remove. She let it be what it was, which was the most honest communication she had ever had with another person, without a single word spoken. She turned and walked back toward the lights of the estate. He walked beside her. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and the mountains were enormous and quiet on all sides, and somewhere in the forest behind them, an owl announced its presence to the cold evening air. She felt, in her chest and in her bones and in the part of her that was the wolf, and the part of her that was the person, and all the ways those two things had always been the same thing, completely and entirely alive. It was a feeling she intended to keep. And this time, she was not going to bury it. The operation against the network took 4 days to execute and years to arrive at. Lena was not in the field for most of it. Cale had been clear about that. Her role was testimony and intelligence, not operational. She had information that the group needed and had given it, and now the group was acting on it, and her presence in a coordinated action against an armed and organized network would have been reckless for someone who had shifted twice in 10 years and had not worked in a tactical context since she was 19. She accepted this, not without some difficulty. She had spent a decade being her own only defense, and standing back while other people handled what was, in significant part, her threat, required a deliberate act of trust that she was still learning the mechanics of. What she did instead was work. She ran the clinic. She cared for animals. She answered her phone when Soren or Cale needed to confirm a detail from her testimony. She made dinner at the estate on the second evening, because no one else had time to do it and people needed to eat. And she discovered, not entirely to her surprise, that she was a better cook than anyone present had apparently anticipated, which she put down to 8 years of making solitary meals interesting enough not to be depressing. Petra ate 3 portions, and told her she should have said something about this earlier. "You didn't ask," Lena said. "True," Petra said. "I'm asking now. Are you also competent in any other unexpected areas that we should know about?" "I can rewire a light switch, and I know 7 different knots from a sailing phase I went through in year 3 of being alone," Lena said. Petra looked at her. "The sailing phase," she said. "I didn't have a boat. I had library books, and a large amount of rope." Petra was quiet for a moment. "That's one of the more human things you've said," she said, not unkindly, with something that was warm and direct and almost affectionate. Lena looked at her. "Is it?" "The rest of you is very composed," Petra said. "The large amount of rope is reassuring." Lena, to her own surprise, laughed. It was genuine and slightly unexpected, and Petra grinned at her, across the table, with the specific satisfaction of someone who has been quietly working toward exactly that result. The operation concluded on day 4, without casualties, and with a body of evidence that Soren described as sufficient, not complete. The network was not an organization that could be dismantled in 4 days, but the operational capacity in the northern region was severely reduced. The specific people who had made her a target were removed from that capacity, and the intelligence gathered during the 4 days, combined with what Lena had given them and what the pack had been building for 3 years, was passed to a coalition of shifter governance bodies who had the authority to pursue the larger legal and structural action. It was not a story with a clean ending. She had understood that from the beginning. What it was a turning point, the thing that had been closing in on her for 10 years, that had been getting closer over the past weeks, had been redirected, not permanently, not forever, but for now, and for the foreseeable future, in a way that gave her options she had not had before. She sat with Cale and Soren in the main room of the estate on the evening of day 4, and Soren gave her the summary, in the same precise, professional way he gave her everything, and when he was done, she nodded once. "Thank you," she said. "Your information was significant," Soren said. "Without the detail you gave us about the approach patterns, we would have missed the connection to the northern cell. It changed the scope of what we were able to do." She nodded again. She was holding that information carefully, what it meant to have been useful in this way, not just a person who had been protected, a person who had contributed something real. After Soren left, she and Kale sat in the quiet of the room for a while. The fire was burning down. Harold was on the best chair again. Gray was asleep near the fire, the healed tendon functioning perfectly now, the dogs breathing deep and even. "What happens now?" she said. "For the pack," he said. "We return to the Northern Territory. We have been here long enough. There is work waiting." She looked at him. "And you're going to say something about me," she said. "I was going to ask a question," he said. "Not say something. Ask it," she said. He looked at her directly. "The clinic," he said. "Dr. Harmon, the town, 8 years of something you built. I am not going to ask you to walk away from that. That's not a question," she said. "The question is whether you've thought about what you want, not what's practical or safe or manageable. What you actually want." She had thought about very little else for the past week. She had thought about the house, and the lavender, and 8 years of careful, ordinary life. She had thought about Carol, and her cat Professor, and Dr. Harmon, and his 10 o'clock tea. She had thought about the clinic, which she genuinely loved, and the job, which she was genuinely good at, and the town, which had given her more than she had recognized, until the possibility of losing it became real. She had also thought about the forest run in the amber light, the bond, clear and present and real, the room full of people who made space for her without requiring her to be anything other than what she was. She had thought about Martin Foale and his 2 years of quiet, determined kindness. She had thought about 31 people, and what they would have wanted for the one who made it. "I want to stay in this town," she said. "The clinic is mine to stay in. Dr. Harmon has been asking me for 2 years to become a partner in the practice, and I have been saying not yet. I am going to say yes." He waited. "I also want to not be alone," she said, "which is a separate thing from the clinic, and the town, and the 8 years. It is about you specifically, and the pack, and the particular situation of having found something real, after a long time of not having it. Those 2 things don't have to be mutually exclusive," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the part I've been thinking about all week." The Northern Territory, she already knew, was 200 miles north of Harrow Creek. Not an impossible distance. Not a simple one. Not a clean solution to the geography of 2 lives that had been built in 2 different places. But Cale Drummond had been running a pack from multiple locations for 9 years. He was not a person for whom distance was an unfamiliar problem. And she was a person who had been in the same place for 8 years and had recently discovered that her particular skill set was more transferable than she had allowed herself to believe. "There are clinics in the north," he said. "There are," she agreed. "Dr. Harmon would need time to find someone. He would need several months," she said. "I would give him that." "And the house." "The house can be rented," she said. "The lavender is self-sustaining. I have tested this by mostly ignoring it for 8 years." He looked at her. Something in his expression was doing several things at once, and she was learning to read them, the specifics of what each element meant. The stillness that was attention, the quality around the eyes that was warmth, the small shift at the corner of his mouth that was the thing he called the smile, and that she now knew to look for, because it was genuine, and therefore worth seeing. "You've thought about this very thoroughly," he said. "I think about everything thoroughly," she said. "It's one of my less convenient qualities." "I find it very convenient," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I am going to need you to be patient," she said. "Not about the big things. I have already decided about the big things, about the smaller things. The habit of self-sufficiency is deep. I will not always ask for help when I need it. I will sometimes revert to managing instead of trusting. I will probably, on difficult days, default to doing everything alone, because that is what a decade teaches a person." "Lena," he said. "I'm not finished." "You are," he said. "Because everything you just said is the specific list of things I already know and am already prepared for, and telling me about them in advance, so I'm not surprised, is exactly the kind of thorough thinking I just said I find very convenient." She stopped. She looked at him. Then she did something she had not done in 10 years. She stopped calculating, and managing, and being thorough and reasonable, and she let the bond that had been present and patient and entirely clear for weeks be exactly what it was. which was enormous, and real, and the most honest thing in the room. Harold slid off the chair and walked over and sat between their feet, apparently deciding this was the right moment for his presence. "Your cat," Cale said, looking down, "has very strong opinions about when to get involved." "He always has," she said. "It's why I kept him." They looked at each other across the small distance of the fireside, and the bond was clear between them, and the fire was burning quietly, and the mountains outside the window were dark and present and entirely unmoved by any of it, which was their nature, and also, in some way Lena could not fully articulate, reassuring. She was still here. She was going to keep being here. Not in hiding, not performing, not managing herself into something smaller than she was, so that the smallness could be kept safely. Here, fully, actually. As herself. That was something she had not believed, at 19 on a dark road going north, that she would ever be able to say. She believed it now. The next morning, she went to see Dr. Harmon. Not at the clinic, at his house, because he was not working on Sundays, and this was a Sunday, and what she was going to say deserved to be said somewhere that was not the professional space they shared, because what she was going to say was, in part, not professional at all. He lived in a comfortable house on the south edge of town, with a garden that was considerably better maintained than hers, and a cat named Duchess, who had been a patient of theirs for 6 years, and who greeted every visitor with the same imperious inspection she brought to all aspects of her existence. He made tea. She sat at his kitchen table and looked at his face, which was kind and creased, and entirely unaware of what was coming, and she felt a specific warmth for him, that she had been keeping at the careful professional distance she kept all warmth, and that she was, right now, deliberately not doing. "I need to tell you some things," she said. He set down his teacup. "All right," he said, in the tone of a man who has lived long enough to understand that sentences beginning that way require full attention. She told him. Not everything. Not all the details that were not hers to share, or that he did not need in order to understand, but the essential shape of it, that she was not who her documents said she was, that she had been living under a new identity for 10 years, for reasons that were serious, and that she was not yet in a position to explain completely. That she had been involved in a situation in the past weeks that had now largely resolved, and that she was safe, and that she was telling him because he deserved to know, and because she was done keeping things from people she genuinely cared about. She told him that she was Lena, that the name was real even if the paperwork was not. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with the remarkable directness of a 71-year-old man who had practiced medicine for 40 years and had very few patients left for anything that was not honest, "Are you going to be all right?" "Yes," she said. "Are you in danger right now?" "No," she said. "Are you going to have to leave?" he said. This was the hard one. She had thought about how to say it. "Not immediately," she said. "I would like to stay for several months, long enough to help you find someone to replace me. I have been thinking about what you said, about the partnership. I would have said yes 6 months ago if I had trusted myself to stay." He looked at her for a long time. "I've known something was off for 3 years," he said. "Not about the work. The work has always been excellent. About whether you were all right." He picked up his teacup. "I kept waiting for you to tell me yourself." "I'm telling you now," she said. "Better late than not at all," he said. "And late is a relative term at 71. He set the cup down. "I would like, when you are ready, and when it is safe, to know more. Not because I need to. Because you have been working beside me for 8 years, and you are one of the most competent and honestly good people I have had the privilege of knowing, and I would like the actual story of you, when you're able to give it." She looked at him. Something in her chest did the thing it had been doing more frequently in the past few weeks, the opening, the unfamiliar and slightly overwhelming experience of being valued for the actual person she was, rather than the performance she offered. "That might take some time," she said. "I have some," he said, "allegedly." She smiled. It was the real one, the kind that did not require any effort at all. They drank their tea. Duchess intervened twice for attention, and received it from both of them, graciously accepting tribute as her due. When Lena left, she stood on Dr. Harmon's front step for a moment in the cold November air, and looked at the street. The mountain was visible at the end of it, bright in the late morning light. The town was doing its Sunday things, quiet and ordinary and entirely itself. She had walked through this town for 8 years, as a person in partial eclipse, showing enough to be accepted, hiding enough to be safe. The performance had become so natural that she had stopped noticing the effort of it. She noticed it now, in its absence. She walked to her car and drove back to the estate and spent the afternoon doing something she had not done in a very long time. She sat in the living room with people around her and did not do anything useful. She read a book. She let Harold redistribute himself across her lap at intervals. She listened to Owen and Petra have an argument about the best hiking route in the area that was conducted with the good-natured intensity of two people who genuinely disagreed and genuinely did not mind. Gray came and rested her head on Lena's knee for a while. The tendon was fully healed now. The dog moved freely, with the unself-conscious ease of an animal that had been well cared for and knew it. Cale came in at 4 in the afternoon, with mud on his boots and something that might have been pine needles in his hair, looked at her sitting in the best chair, with a cat on her lap and a dog at her knee, and said, "You've colonized the room." "It's a large room," she said. He sat down across from her. Gray abandoned Lena immediately in favor of his preferred person, which Lena found fair and also, privately, slightly amusing. "Dr. Harmon," Cale said. "Done," she said. How was it? She thought about the kitchen table and the tea and the 71-year-old man who said I've known something was off for 3 years and had waited, patiently, for her to tell him herself. "Good," she said. It was good. He nodded. They sat in the comfortable, inhabited quiet of a Sunday afternoon. The fire was lit. The light was going amber outside. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone was making dinner, and the smell of it was warm and good. She looked at the room, at the people in it, some working, some resting, some talking in the low, easy way, of people who spend a great deal of time together, at the dogs, and the one visiting cat, at the fire. She had not had this for 10 years. She had not let herself want it for 10 years, because wanting things you cannot have is a particular and unnecessary form of suffering, and she had suffered enough of the necessary kind. She let herself want it now. She let herself have it. That was new. That was the newest thing. And it sat in her chest, like something warm and steady, and entirely real, and she did not manage it, or diminish it, or file it somewhere safe. She simply felt it. That was enough. That was, she was learning, entirely enough. Spring came to the Northern Territory 6 weeks after it came to Harrow Creek. The trees here were different, older, taller, the canopy denser, the forest floor softer with the accumulated years of needles and moss, and the particular richness of ground that had not been disturbed by roads or development. The mountains were higher and the ridges sharper, and the air had a quality to it that Lena, who had grown up in forests not unlike this one, recognized in the way you recognize a thing you forgot you knew. She had moved in February. Not easily. Not without the specific and complicated grief of leaving a place she had built 8 years into, of handing Dr. Harmon the keys to the clinic and standing in the car park with him on a cold morning and saying goodbye to someone who had, without knowing it, been one of the most stabilizing elements of a decade she would not have survived without stabilizing elements. He had shaken her hand, and then, with the unsentimental practicality of a man who had long since stopped worrying about what was appropriate, had pulled her into a brief, firm embrace, and told her to come back and visit, and to keep in touch, and to for goodness sake, eat properly wherever she was going. She had promised all three. She had driven north with Harold in his carrier on the passenger seat, complaining with continuous and detailed eloquence about the injustice of the situation, and she had stopped once at a viewpoint to look back at the mountains that had held her for 8 years, small and bright in the rearview distance, and she had said something private and true to herself, and then she had driven on. The house at the Northern Territory was not hers alone. It was adjacent to the main estate, a smaller building that had been used for various purposes over the years and that had been made comfortable for her in the weeks before she arrived, not lavishly, but carefully, with the specific attention of people who had thought about what she would need. A workspace, a room for the books she had accumulated over 8 years and transported in 4 boxes, a garden plot, currently empty, which she had already begun to plan. She had been there 3 months. She discovered in those 3 months, not very good at belonging in the easy, uncomplicated way that some people belonged to the groups they were part of. She was good at her work, and she was good at conversation, and she was improving, steadily, at the specific art of being in a room, without calculating the cost of staying in it. But belonging was a larger thing than any of those individual skills, and she was building it the way she built most things, slowly, deliberately, with more precision than was probably necessary. The pack was patient, not demonstratively. They did not perform patience at her. They simply continued to do what they did, which was live their lives with the comfortable, complicated ease of people who had chosen to share them, and they made space for her in that living, without requiring her to fill the space completely, or fill it immediately, or fill it at all, if she was not ready. She was becoming ready, gradually. She had a job at the veterinary practice in the town nearest the territory, 2 days a week, supplemented by the consulting work she had agreed to do with Dr. Harmon's replacement in Harrow Creek, which she did remotely, and which gave her a connection to the clinic she had built that she found she was not yet ready to sever completely, and that she suspected she might not sever at all, just renegotiate into a form that could coexist with everything else. She shifted twice a week now, not in emergency, and not for any tactical reason, because she was a wolf, and because wolves were not meant to go 10 years without being what they were, and because the reconditioning of a body that had been bound that long was slow work that required consistent practice, and she was nothing if not consistent. The bond between herself and Cale was something she had stopped trying to manage or describe, and had simply begun to live with, which was considerably more effective and significantly less exhausting. It did not announce itself. It was not dramatic or consuming in the way she had always, somewhere in the abstract, been slightly afraid of intense things being. It was steady, it was present, it communicated clearly and without drama, and it was, she had come to understand, not a bond that had arrived with his presence in Harrow Creek, but one that had always existed, and that had found them both when they were ready. Or when she was ready. She suspected he had been ready rather longer. She had told him this, once, in the direct way she said most things. "You've been patient," she said. "You needed time," he said. "Most people don't wait that long for someone who doesn't know they're waiting," she said. "I knew," he said. "You're not particularly difficult to read once you decide to let someone look." She had thought about this for a while. "I spent 10 years making myself very difficult to read." "For people who weren't paying attention," he said. "Yes." She had looked at him for a moment. "That's a very specific qualifier." "It's an accurate one," he said. She had not had an answer for that. She had found, increasingly, that she did not always need one. In April, she began something she had been thinking about since reading Martin Fole's notes in February. She began writing. Not anything intended for anyone else. Not a report, or a testimony, or a formal document. Something private, the specific kind of writing that people do when they are trying to make something true by putting it into words. She wrote about her pack, not about the attack, not about the October forest, about before, about her mother and the Sunday mornings, about her father and the forest at night, about her brother, who she allowed herself to name now, and to remember, with the specific and painful and ultimately necessary clarity of someone who has finally accepted that refusing to remember is not the same as being protected from grief. She wrote their names, all 31 of them, everyone she could remember, and she could remember most of them, because her memory was the one thing that had never been bound, and all those careful years of not thinking about them had preserved them in the amber of unsaid things. She wrote their names, and she wrote what she knew of each person, and she wrote it carefully and precisely, and with all the love she had been not saying for 10 years. It took her the better part of 2 weeks. She was not trying to write quickly. She was trying to write truthfully. When she finished, she sat with it for a day. Then she added one more section, shorter than the rest. She wrote about what had happened in Harrow Creek, and what was happening now, not a happy ending, which would have been both inaccurate and reductive. A continuation. A turning of a corner that had taken 10 years to reach, and that had arrived, like most significant arrivals, with less fanfare than expected, and more weight than she had quite anticipated. She wrote about belonging. She wrote about what it felt like to stop performing a life and start living one. She wrote about the specific and ongoing difficulty of it, and the specific and ongoing value of it, and the fact that she was doing it imperfectly, and that imperfectly was, as far as she could tell, the only available version. She wrote about Martin Fole, the old historian who had spent 2 years doing something kind for people he would never meet, and she wrote that she intended to do something with what he had found. Not immediately, when she was ready. A proper documentation. Something that acknowledged what had happened to her pack in a way that was accurate, and that could be held and pointed to and said, these people existed. This happened to them. This is who they were. She had spoken about this with Cale. He had people who could help with the formal aspects of it. She would take that help. She was learning to take help. It was ongoing work. She was not perfect at it. On a Saturday in late April, she hiked with Petra and Owen in the northern forest. Owen was responsible for a narrative about a previous hike that grew more implausible with each telling, and that Petra and Lena challenged at several points on factual grounds, to his completely cheerful and transparent dishonesty about all of it. It was, she noted to herself, very ordinary. 2 people she had known for 5 months, talking nonsense on a trail, with the mountains around them, and the early spring leaves bright and new on the deciduous trees among the pines. She had spent 10 years bracing for things to go wrong. Nothing went wrong. She was learning, slowly and with the same deliberateness she brought to everything, that this was allowed, that ordinary good things did not need to be held at a careful distance in case they were taken away. That loss, which she had suffered enormously, and from which she was still, in the most honest accounting, in the long process of recovery, was not a reason to refuse the things that were here now. The things that were here now were real. They were hers. She was keeping them. In the evening, she sat on the step of her house, with Harold on her lap, and watched the last of the spring light leave the sky. Gray came and sat beside her, which the dog had been in the habit of doing since the first week, apparently having decided that Lena's steps were a suitable location. Lena had no objection. Cale came out of the main house and walked across the ground between the buildings and sat on the step beside her. He was carrying 2 cups of tea, which she had not asked for, and which she accepted without comment, because she was also learning that some things did not need commenting on, that some things could simply be received. The sky was going from gold to rose, to the first clear, darkening blue of evening. "You're thinking," he said. "I'm always thinking," she said. "More than usual," he said. She looked at the sky. "I was thinking about names," she said. "My actual name." He waited. "I'd like to start using it," she said. "The paperwork is going to be complicated. Soren has already told me it will take time, but I want to start." He was quiet for a moment. "What is it?" She told him. The real one. Her mother's choice. The one she had given back to herself on a dark road at 19, as the one thing she could keep, and that she had carried silently all this time, and that she was giving now to someone else. He said it once, carefully. "The way you say a name when you want to be sure you are saying it correctly." She nodded. He said it again, just to say it, not for any other purpose. She sat with that for a moment, her real name, said out loud by someone who knew who she was, in the last light of an April evening in the northern mountains. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. She drank her tea. Harold rearranged himself on her lap and settled with a sigh of profound contentment. Gray pressed her large warm head against Lena's knee. Above them, the stars were beginning to appear. The same stars she had looked at through a kitchen ceiling in a small mountain town. The same stars that had been there before any of this, and would be there long after. She was not the person she had been at 19. She was not the person she had been in Harrow Creek. She was someone who had been both of those people, and who had come through a great deal to arrive at this specific step, on this specific evening, with a real name, and a cup of tea, and the warm weight of a cat and a dog, and the steady, genuine presence of someone beside her, who had been paying attention, when she finally allowed herself to be seen. It was not a perfect life. She was not a perfect person. The healing was long and ongoing, and some days the walls were up in spite of everything, and some days the grief was present and real, and insisting on its due, which she was learning to give it. But she was here, actually here, entirely present in her own life, with her own name, belonging to herself, and also, carefully and honestly, and with every wall she had, slowly learning to open, belonging to something larger than herself. She had pretended to be human for 10 years. The pretending was over. What she was, and what she had always been, underneath every performance and every binding, and every careful year of surviving something that had been designed to leave no survivors was exactly this. A person who had endured. A wolf who had come home. Someone with a real name and a real life and a real future, in the specific and unglamorous and entirely beautiful way that real things are beautiful. She looked at the stars. She was not afraid of them anymore. She was not afraid of much anymore. She was learning, and she was present, and she was here. That, she had finally come to understand, was more than enough. That was everything. The days that followed settled into rhythms she had not expected and had not planned for. This was, she was learning, how the best things tended to arrive, not as outcomes of careful strategy, though she had spent 10 years believing strategy was the only reliable protection against being undone, but as the natural consequence of choosing, repeatedly and imperfectly, to stay. She went to work. She cared for animals in the town clinic 2 days a week, and she did her remote consulting on the others, and she kept the detailed, thorough patient records she had always kept, and she was good at her job, in the direct, unflashy way she had always been good at it, which was the best way to be good at anything. She shifted twice a week in the northern forest, sometimes alone and sometimes not. The muscle memory was returning. She was faster than she had been in the early weeks, not as fast as she had once been, before 10 years of binding. Her body was relearning something it had never forgotten, just stored, waiting for the conditions that would allow it back out. She was patient with this. She had learned patience in a long involuntary school, and it had given her something she had not expected to find useful on the other side, which was the ability to take a long view, to understand that some recoveries did not have a deadline, and that the absence of a deadline was not the same as the absence of progress. She wrote in the evenings. The document about her pack was becoming something real, something that had structure and weight, something that named 31 people, and said clearly, and without softening, that they had lived, and that they had mattered, and that what happened to them was wrong, and that someone who survived them had spent 10 years carrying the fact of them, before finding the conditions in which to put them down properly. Soren was helping her with the formal documentation aspects. He was efficient and thorough, and conducted the process with the same professional respect he brought to everything, and she was grateful for this, in the specific way she was grateful for precise and effective things. She had conversations she had not expected to have, with Owen, who was younger than he sometimes seemed, and who had his own complicated history that he disclosed in pieces over several weeks, not as a demonstration of trust, but simply as the natural consequence of two people spending time in each other's company. With Petra, who she was discovering was one of the most genuinely interesting people she had ever known, with a quality of mind that moved between practical and philosophical without warning, and that Lena found, to her own surprise, deeply enjoyable to engage with. She had conversations with Cale that were unlike any she had ever had with anyone, because the bond meant that some things did not need to be said, and could simply be known, and what remained to say was therefore always something that was worth saying, rather than the filler that occupied most human conversation. She appreciated the efficiency of it. She also appreciated, when she examined it honestly, everything that was not efficiency. She called Dr. Harmon twice a month. He reported on the new nurse he had hired, a practical young man named Declan who was, according to Dr. Harmon, entirely competent, but considerably less interesting than Lena, and who had not yet attempted to discuss the botanical properties of the plants in the waiting room, which Lena had apparently done on a regular basis, without fully registering that she was doing it. She had not known she did that. She found this a surprisingly warming piece of information. She called Carol once, which was harder, because Carol did not know anything, and could not be told, and would probably never know the full truth of who the woman she had chatted with about Biscuit the Retriever's ear infections had actually been. But Carol was warm and uncomplicated, and reported that the town was the same as ever, and that the new veterinary nurse was perfectly nice but very young, and asked when Lena was coming back to visit, and Lena said she would try in the summer. She meant it. She was going to mean more things from now on. In May, there was a gathering of the broader Ashvale network, people from several connected packs and affiliated groups, held over a weekend at the Northern Estate. It was large and complicated, and involved a great deal of logistics that she observed from a slight distance, impressed despite herself, at the scope of what Cale managed without apparent effort. She was introduced as Lena, her real name, the one she had given him on the April step, not with ceremony. Kale was not a person who went in for ceremony, simply as Lena, to the people she had not yet met, without title or designation, or any particular editorial about who she was, or what she was to him, which she had not asked for, and did not need. She was capable of introducing herself. She did. She spoke to people she had never met, and told them true things about herself, and found that the truth, delivered plainly and without management, was surprisingly sustainable. It did not require the elaborate maintenance that the performance had required. It did not leave her exhausted at the end of an evening. It simply was what it was, and the people she spoke to either found it interesting or did not, and either way she was the same person afterward. She had known this, in the abstract, for years. The difference between knowing a thing in the abstract and living it was, she was finding, consistently larger than the abstract version suggested. On the last evening of the gathering, she sat with a woman named Helen, who was older than anyone else present, a member of a separate pack from the far north, and who had the particular quality of presence that very old people sometimes have, the quality of someone who has been paying attention for a long time, and has therefore seen most of the ways things tend to go. Helen asked her how she was finding it, coming into a pack at this stage of life. Lena thought about it honestly. Strange, she said, and better than strange. Helen nodded as if this was a sufficient answer, which it was. I was alone a long time, Lena said. I built things alone. I survived alone. I was good at it. Being good at surviving alone is a particular skill, Helen said. Useful, also costly. Yes, Lena said. The cost is what I'm still reckoning with. That's the honest answer, Helen said. Most people give me a tidier one. I don't have a tidier one, Lena said. Helen looked at her for a moment, with the calm, specific attention of someone who has been looking at people for a long time. You'll be all right, she said. Not a platitude, not comfort offered reflexively, a genuine assessment given directly. Lena received it as what it was. I know, she said. And she did know, not with the forced certainty of someone trying to convince themselves of something. With the genuine and grounded knowledge of a person who had spent the past several months accumulating real evidence, and who was, at her core, a person who trusted evidence. She was all right. She was becoming more all right as each week passed. She was doing the work of it, slowly and honestly and without shortcuts. And it was not comfortable, and it was not simple, and it was not, on many specific days, anything that felt like progress from the inside. But it was real. Every difficult and unglamorous part of it was real. And real was the thing she had been searching for, without knowing she was searching for it, since the night she drove north in the dark and began the long, exhausting, ultimately insufficient project of becoming someone who did not need anything real. She had needed it the whole time. She was glad she had found it. She was glad she had stayed long enough to find it. On the last day of May, she stood at the edge of the northern forest in the early morning, just before her shift, and she shifted easily and completely, and ran through the trees in the cool morning air, with the specific joy of an animal that has finally, fully, come home to itself. She was fast, faster than she had been in April, faster than she had been in March. The body was remembering. The wolf was present and strong and entirely itself. She ran until the light told her it was time to go back, and then she shifted back on the forest edge in the early sun and walked across the grounds in her human form, with her breath still quick from the run and the morning cold on her face. Kale was outside with a cup of coffee, which he handed to her without a word, which was a habit of his she had come to rely on, in the way that you rely on things that are simply and consistently there. She drank the coffee. The forest was bright behind her. The estate was warm and lived in ahead. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. It had taken 10 years, and considerable distances, and more pain than she would have chosen. And she was here. Lena. Her real name. Her real life. Hers.